Am I? Take that to heart.
30,000 of us.
That's a number.
Are you really?
Spread the wealth. Yeah. Good. Like usually when we debate, like across. I know, we look at each other. What is wrong with you guys on a Friday night coming here?
I actually had a meeting. Like, yeah, but, why not? Oh.
I wanted to, like. Yeah, look, stick to each other.
They still sit.
Starting to break up.
Did you ever get into finance? Sorry. Come on, Dad.
I'm busy at my firm. I have work. So busy. I need to.
Which judge you have? When you?
It has not filed.
Okay.
It's drafted, but not filed. And it might get removed, so.
Okay.
Then you're dealing with federal, but anyway, I'd like to, I need somebody to handle it because I can't get my partner to take it. It's a very good. This client. Great space. He spent 500. He's got a lot. So what was your question? Who were you asking me about? My shaker? He didn't come in. Never. I like him 70% of the time.
Okay, good afternoon. We're ready to begin this September 1st session of the commission. We'll begin with the call of the roll.
Representative Jason Nemus,
Here.
Co-Chair Earl Jones.
Here.
Senator Gerald Neal, Senator Julie Rocky Adams, Senator Mike Nemus,
Present.
Representative Ken Fleming, Representative Pamela Stevenson, Councilmember Anthony Piagentini, Councilmember Arthur,
Present.
Councilmember Fowler, Mary Ann Butler, Shelby Williams Somerville,
Here.
Scott Schoenberg, Mayor Bonnie Jung. Here. And Chief Sean Dreisbeck.
So Scott is traveling. He's going to come in when he can. And then I think Chief Driesbach is trying to get in now.
That's correct. Thank you.
Oh, I think that was Brian that said that.
Unless it's from.
Okay, so the purpose of today's meeting is to review the recommendations that the commissioners have submitted. I want to make one point here. I know you all may have picked up what Brian printed out, which are the recommendations as they were submitted. As I indicated in my email of last night, I have gone through and tried to aggregate those into buckets where all of the like recommendations are put together so that we can see and consider a particular issue at one time rather than flipping through all these recommendations to try to locate them and see whether or not they are related. If you did not get a copy of that, if you didn't print that out in time, I have copies here. If you'd like one, just let me know and I'll get them to you. Okay? So because I'd like to work from this document, otherwise you'll get lost.
Mr. Chairman, before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that the mayor sent all the members of the commission a letter today. If you've not seen that, hopefully you could take a minute to read it. Out of respect for the mayor, I want to note that none of the recommendations that Representative Fleming and I made, I'll wait. So none of the recommendations that Representative Fleming and I made have anything to do with who the mayor is. They're structural issues. But out of respect for the mayor and to try to operate in good faith to meet him, as we all hope that he's a very successful mayor, Representative Fleming and I have talked, and we've decided that we are not going to be asking for consideration of the recommendation of the stacking of the taxes. I think it's a good thing to outlaw that. It's not allowed in Kentucky, in other areas of Kentucky, as it is in Louisville. I think it's unfair that it is in Louisville, but I will not be bringing that forward for a recommendation today out of a gesture of good faith to meet the mayor where he is and to try to help him succeed as the mayor of our metro. The stacking one, I won't be bringing that one forward.
Yes. Senator Neal.
Pardon me, I had to step out just for a second and take a call, but we have covered this. I just want to be clear on what we're doing today. Are we voting today, or is that next time we come? What are we doing?
The objective today is to, yes, vote on as many of these recommendations as we can. And those that, let's say, achieve a consensus vote and pass, if you will, or receive a majority support, we'll put those aside. The ones that do not, we'll put those into the other column, if you will. And we'll see whether or not the ones that are rejected have maybe worked out. Maybe we'll have figure out some way that we as a body can amend them, revise them, shorten them, expand them, shrink them, whatever it might be, to see whether or not they can obtain majority support. And if not, they fall out.
May I address
Please.
this process? I'm concerned at how we've undertaken this. I don't want to pull out any particular individual or anything like that. I mean, we're all doing the best we can with what we got, I'm sure. But it seems that some of the data that's been presented and the assumptions on which they're based upon, as I look deeper into this, do not seem to be accurate. It also appears to me that the whole process as it relates to need, when you're dealing with systems and redistribution or distribution of resources addressing particular issues, I don't think has been adequately addressed and supported in this process at this point. In other words, what I'm saying is I think we're unready. I know I'm unready. And maybe that's my deficiency. But I'm concerned that we'll get a report that lacks credibility or opens up itself to attack, and that serves as creating further division, which I think the purpose of what we're doing, I'm hoping, is to address total community needs and not have one part of the community against another, which is what I've heard over and over and over again. It's very concerning to me. I think that we would be well advised to slow this process down and go deeper. We need some needs assessments in multiple areas in order to make some intelligent decisions, unless we've already decided that's where we're going, this is what we want, and this is, and I'm hoping that's not the case, although some of the testimony and some of the comments that have been made here suggest to me, and it's a human thing, I understand that. So I just want to put that on the record because it gives me deep concern, because anything that divides and doesn't bring our community together, anything that takes from one part of our community to benefit the other when we have an opportunity to address the issues before our community across the board, give me concern. I hope I'm wrong, but that's where I think we are. I think we have an opportunity. I hope we don't short circuit it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before we begin the process of reviewing these recommendations?
Chair, I just want to correct something that was said in the last meeting. The leaders of the tax and GAPS committees volunteered at the February 17th meeting. I asked co-chairs of the commission to appoint leaders. Councilman Piagentini jokingly motioned for me to lead, but it was never voted on, and he said he would call me, work something out. I called him. I did that. We met multiple times. We also worked with Dr. Coombs. We came up with a full list of Metro government services, and up until really just last week, we're still debating how those services are distributed. Dr. Coombs also got a list of suburban city services. He had 72 suburban cities that responded, and based on the last update, he's still waiting on clerks to respond to that inquiry. Anyone could have volunteered to coordinate that committee meeting, but nobody did, and that's no one person's fault, but there was work done, and I just wanted to make that clear. Also wanted to make it clear that even though I couldn't attend the public meetings because I have my kids, I watched all of them, and I'm so thankful for the people who could go there in person, but not everyone has that privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and if I can just respond to Senator Neal's comments. I think it's not a surprise to any of us. We're all familiar with the fact that we got a little, started a little short in time-wise because we had some difficulty getting our support from our consultant. It's been difficult to make up for some of that. I think we all acknowledge that. I accept your point that some of the data is maybe not inadequate. I think that should affect the way we look at these proposals, and certainly it should affect the way we vote on those proposals or recommendations. And so I would suggest, let's go through the process. I would say, frankly, I think that the commission needs to act, at least where it can act, because I would suspect that the legislation having been passed, that some things will happen with or without the commission's recommendations or suggestions. And I think that we should take the opportunity to weigh in where we can. But I appreciate your point.
Mr. Chairman, just to make sure I clarify, you said difficulty in getting the work from the consultant, and you didn't mean it to be negative toward the consultant, but I just wanted to make sure to clarify the record that was because the former mayor wouldn't sign the contract that everybody agreed with, even council. So that's on the former mayor. I would also note that the information that we don't have, I didn't make recommendations based on that. So there's a number of recommendations in my head that I want to make that I didn't make because we don't have full information. The things that are not fully accurate have to do with capital projects, which we also didn't make recommendations of. And even those, if you take the mayor's office's recommendations, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars that may be inaccurate in overall couple $2 billion. So even that I think is minimum, but I didn't make any recommendations on those scores either, which I would have done so. So I think the recommendations that are made are amply foundation, have an ample foundation on the data that we've received, and want to move forward on all the recommendations.
I take everything I hear here as a given, but just listening to this back and forth and the words I'm hearing here tells me this is unreadiness. Some people may feel confident, and thank you for that, but I'm a fairly reasonable person, and I process information reasonably, and I'm telling you that, in my view, we should be very careful how we move forward. This is quite inadequate in anything I've participated in trying to discern outcomes. This is not a sufficiently completed or investigated process that I've been associated with.
We heard from one of the co-chairs that we will take back up items next week. Is that the will of everyone else? I just wanted to make sure we're clear on that. If we don't have consensus, that we'll continue discussing it next week.
Well, I mean, I guess that is something that we can vote on as a whole, but that is certainly the suggestion of the co-chairs, mainly because back to this question of where do we go with this effort here? We have a deadline. There's no process that I'm aware of to extend that deadline. We therefore, it seems to me, have an obligation to act under the mandate we've been given to report to the extent that we can.
If I may, I agree with that. I guess it depends on my apprehension about what that means based upon what I've already seen in this process that we report. What I'm saying is we don't short circuit this piece, but if we do a report, we need to keep these issues open so that we can investigate them more thoroughly and more efficiently in a way that we all can embrace them, or at least have some sense, a modicum of agreement of what we are trying to do. I'm putting up a word of caution, and I'm saying that in my experience, this is quite inadequate.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that I didn't step over you.
Oh, no, go
Okay.
right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're ready to move forward on some of these things. I would note that my friend Senator Neal has admonished us to have caution a number of times, and he's been heard by me. I certainly agree with him, which is why, for example, some of the recommendations that I made, let's take the one on PVA. Some of the recommendations that I've made is, look, we've had discussions, but we don't have enough information to make a policy recommendation. So let's keep it open and let's do some more study. So we've put that caution into, at least Representative Fleming and I have put that caution into our recommendations. And I think we should move forward. And my view is today we should have three categories. Yes, we agree, move forward on that recommendation. No, we don't, off the table. That's for whatever reason. And then the other one would be an instruction to you and me, Mr. Co-Chair, is to say, this needs a little bit of work, but this is kind of in the mix. So go back to the drawing board, you two, and bring us something next week that we might reconsider. So that's what I think. We should have the three buckets: yes, no, and then in the middle is let's see if we can do a little bit more work and tease it out. So if we might, the road fund situation I think should be an easy one. We have 5 recommendations. My proposal is that we take the first, of course I would say that, but my proposal is that we take the language of the Nemes-Fleming recommendation, supplement it with 2 pieces of information from Ms. Butler, and that is that say that the formula for the road fund was designed in the 1940s, and then also that the roads are not keeping up with development. Some of the other language I think is really good for us in Louisville to discuss. But saying things like Louisville needs this, Louisville needs that, I don't know that that's going to hit the ear in Frankfurt in the same way. I think all 15 of us will agree with this. But so my suggestion is we move forward with those amendments. Also, Ms. Somerville mentions information about economic development that we can incorporate into the language as well. But I think that's just wordsmithing. And my recommendation is we move forward with making the road fund change of the formula part of the commission's recommendation.
Right, and I would just add that the other commissioners who had recommendations in the same area, if they want to address this issue, they really should at this point. If there's one particular point that they'd like to make certain gets into the recommendation or into the vote thing, so we vote on, they should do that. Otherwise, I think the suggestion that the co-chair Nemus has made makes sense to me.
Don't just, if I may,
Please.
I want to make sure you got understand my comments carefully. I said, there's only words of caution. And I'm sure there's things can go forward. I don't think they necessarily are mutually exclusive. But with the admonition that I've heard, let's do it.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
I just
Yes.
want to make one comment on Senator Neal, his sentiments. And I think he brings up a really good point that, this is an ongoing conversation. We should have been having this conversation years ago, and the former mayor never allowed it to happen. Now we have a new mayor, new administration, kind of new eyes looking at this. So I agree with him that we should always have an eye toward continuing this discussion. How can we do better for the citizens across this county? And at the same time, we do have some real actionable items that I call it low-hanging fruit that we can start to move forward on in an innovative and creative way to move our community forward. But I agree with them. These conversations should have been happening years ago. And how is merger doing? Is it working for some? Is it working for all? And so with that in mind, I agree with them, and I look forward to making some of these recommendations today that we can all come together on.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I could, I don't know if we want to go by a motion process, or if a second from co-chair Representative Nemus. But I wanted to, I think this is the perfect one to move forward on. It's something we see broad agreement on, I think, across this commission, which is revamping. I like using the language while adding some of the language from Ms. Butler. I was looking at some of the other language to see if there's anything else to be added. Most of it looks fairly the same. I would acknowledge Councilman Fowler has some more specific information that frankly I completely agree with, talking about the District 5 backlog and caseload and a bunch of other operational issues with the state Kentucky Transportation Cabinet that affect Louisville. I couldn't agree more. I don't know if I want to put it in the full recommendation coming out of here, but maybe an operational note that I think that's a agreed to sentiments on the general operational. But if I can second, I'd love to move forward with this particular one as a vote of this committee. Thank you.
Hi, it's Mary Ann. I agree we need to mention something about District 5 because I know there have been projects that have sat on desk where people have retired and it doesn't get picked up till somebody calls about it. And it could be 6-8 months later and the cost has gone up 10, 20, 30, 40%. And that impacts all of us right in the pocket. So whatever we can do to encourage KYTC District 5 with their staffing issues, just so that projects can get reviewed sooner and the costs don't go up.
Any other further comments on road funding?
So I agree with everything that's been said, except for including things in District 5. And the reason for that, Marianne, is not that I disagree with the sentiment, but I'm thinking about who's going to read this. It's our colleagues in Frankfurt, and they've got their districts. And so I don't want anybody to read this and say, this is going to help Louisville, but not Pulaski. When it will also help Pulaski, because revising the Formula 5 will help all areas of economic development, population, so forth. And so I hesitate to put anything in there about any particular district because we're
Well,
going to try to.
Then why don't we just put in there that we need to help KYTC across the board with staffing
Great.
issues to eliminate
I think that's great.
backlogs that cause local governments to have to pay more. I mean, the cost of stuff has gone up tremendously. I know of one project that's about 6 years old.
Yep, I agree with that. So
James, I agree. I just wanted to say, if we do reference specific districts, maybe we could use those as examples to speak about the backlog. But I agree that we need to make sure we're putting forth something that's going to benefit the Commonwealth.
So how does the recommendation read now?
Well, you know, we can either spend time now wordsmithing these, or we can focus on the concepts we want to put in there, and then come back on the 8th with the more specific language. Now, we can discuss this right now. I'm not suggesting that is the answer, but it would seem to me that I think we've got consensus that we're making a recommendation on road funding, changing the formula. And I think that if that's the motion, then I think we should vote on that, and we'll come back with a fully formed statement for the report.
Yes, that's my motion.
Is that agreeable?
Agreed.
So then, can we take the roll, please, on these votes one at a time? So on the road fund, recommendation regarding road fund, funding, changing the road fund formula.
Jason Nemus.
Yes.
Earl Jones.
Yes.
Gerald Neal. Julie Rocky Adams.
Yes.
Mike Nemus.
Aye.
Ken Fleming. Pamela Stevenson. Anthony Piagentini.
Yes.
Ja'Cory Arthur.
Yes.
Cindy Fowler.
Yes.
Marianne Butler.
Yes.
Shelby Williams Somerville. Scott Schoenberg. Bonnie Young.
Yes.
Sean Drasback.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 13, 14, 15, and a unanimous vote. Sorry, sir.
Okay. That covers the ones on economic incentives. Do you mean the entire area, or you're suggesting just Scott's specific proposal?
Scott's proposal and anything that touches on it, but I don't know that. The next one is the Butler Affordable House Production. I don't think that touches on any of his.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just want to make sure what I just said yes to. No, I'm going back a little bit. I just want to be clear.
Yes.
We're saying yes to, we're adopting this subject to further refinement of language, which means we will revisit this
Correct.
before we go forward. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
We're going to revisit the language, but not the concept. We're
Correct.
agreeing to this, just makes,
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so there are a number of items here under economic development. To Jason's point, we'll skip over Mr. Schoenberger's. And that then says that we should want to pick up either you, Marianne, or Shelby. You want to address your items here under economic development?
I'm happy to go. The affordable housing production, right now, it's just 20 million in annual credits, up to 20 million, spread out over 10 years. And that sounds good, but if we could put some other things in there to incentivize people to do infill development, so that we don't have to take our utilities further out. There's already sidewalks, there's other things. And that also helps from, when we were out at Eastern High School, we heard a lot of people, they didn't want more apartments, multifamily structures, etc. This would help get people coming back into infill if we could do stuff like this, give more walkable neighborhoods, etc. And whether it's, single family townhomes, condos, whatever it may be, it needs to be written for multifamily.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of Ms. Butler?
Please.
First of all, I fully support letter B. This is something I I know it's been discussed. We've not taken any action, but love the idea, particularly around the conversions from commercial to residential. I know a lot of developers have talked about this. Other cities are going through this process, so thank you for this. I just want to double check something on letter A. Are you saying this already exists, or are you saying you're recommending it?
No, it's a recommendation. It would be
Okay.
a new tax credit, but it works somewhat similar to a TIF. You know, they
Got
do
it.
the work, they have to do the work. There's a max of what they can get back, and there's a set number of years in which they have to meet whatever the agreement says.
Okay. Then the only thing, and maybe this is a wordsmithing thing more than anything else, Mary Ann, and something maybe we, again, similarly vote on concept and worry about wordsmithing over the next week. I do want to be careful, to your point about the types of housing built in different communities across the city, right? To be clear, District 19 has built more multifamily housing units than any other district in the city over the past 3 years. Much of it has not been controversial, actually. It's been built along major arterial corridors like Shelbyville Road or Old Henry Road, and that's been great. And most people have embraced it. The issue has only been when there's been, and there's one pending right now, multifamily, high-density residential on a rural road without the infrastructure to support it, right? Not to mention it's an environmentally sensitive area. So I think you've worded it well here. I just may caveat it with subject to, local land development code procedure and that type of thing. Because I do
Cool.
like that it considers
Well-
multi and single family and
And
evenly
rural
divided
housing
urban.
as well.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Oh, and we also have a rural housing development in there because this would be a statewide tax
Good
credit,
point.
not just
Right,
one
right.
for Louisville Metro.
Excellent point. Great. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question here? Is what's the relationship between the proposal and the reference to the $20 million? Is this for additional funding or is it some?
It would be a tax credit. So if a developer came and said they want to do this, but for the fact that they need some additional funding, so as opposed to the government putting up funding, we would give them some tax credits. It would not go over $20 million and it would not exceed 10 years.
Okay, got it.
Mr. Chairman, I
So-
have a question.
Just wanted to add that when we heard from Rebecca Fleischaker from the Downtown Partnership, we asked what could we do to help, and this perfectly aligns with what she wanted. If you also look at the mayor's letter, it aligns with one of his asks as well, that also mentions the need for utilizing a tool like this for homeownership. And to the extent
Yes.
that we do mention the need in Louisville, I'm glad the word rural is in here. We have a housing needs assessment that talks about a multi-billion-dollar need. I'm sure there's something similar for other counties, so I think it's important for us to look at what that need is outside of
Yeah.
our city as well.
Oh, absolutely, especially in relation to Western Kentucky that so many lost their homes in the tornado. It's going to be years before they can rebuild if they don't get some sort of help. And the same with Eastern Kentucky with the flooding.
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Please.
Just for clarification on the Western and Eastern Kentucky housing, we've put in almost $400 million to
Yeah.
rebuild those housings. So
Yeah.
that's in process. The only clarification I wanted to get on this item is the 20 million tax credit. What my concern is that those people who build multifamily are going to consume that tax credit because they usually have the ability to do projects a lot quicker. I'm interested in seeing affordable home ownership, and I don't want to see that get boxed out by the multifamily when we have an opportunity here to really sink our teeth into an ownership type of project. So when we wordsmith it, do we make sure that we protect that it doesn't all go into one rather than the other?
Well, I think you've got a good point. I think the way it's written, though, it talks about multifamily and single family affordable. Maybe you write it that half can be multifamily, half has to be single family with a track for home ownership.
Yeah,
But then,
let's figure out how we word
yeah.
that. I just don't want I just don't
And
want to
also,
box
I
them
think
out.
the tax credit bonuses, I think we can, you can add a bonus in there. We just, like you said, have to wordsmith it, but a bonus going towards a home ownership track for the housing that's built. Or if it's not built, if it's rehabbed, whatever it may be. Because, you can get adaptive reuse of a lot of different buildings.
But Mary Ann, I'd like to work with you on that wordsmithing because I think it's an important that we start to build some generational wealth with affordable housing.
Oh, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I know this is also related to Schoenberger's recommendation on page 3 in some way. We had a lot of conversations to Jacory's point about affordable housing, and I think most people on both sides of all these questions, all sides of these questions, I should say, said that we wanted to get affordable housing, we want to get people into ownership. I'm not ready to vote on anything that talks about infilling or anything of that nature. Haven't thought about it enough, haven't talked about it with anyone. I am ready, and I think we've had a lot of discussions on incentivizing affordable care, affordable housing with the primary incentive of getting people into home ownership. So if we want to make a recommendation that says we go toward home ownership and affordable house production and give examples of possibilities, I'm for that, but I'll be voting no on if it's a specific request that's made in this recommendation. But I do think we should make one on affordable housing that's more general and makes a recommendation that the General Assembly help with those goals.
I'm just curious, where did 20 million come from, Mary Ann?
It was just a number that was picked. You can pick any number.
Okay.
Well, I'm still trying.
Do we have to be mindful, whatever, if we enact, if there's something like that, $20 million, this is going to be a statewide statute. And Louisville may not get a whole lot as much as, $20 million. Now, I think that there definitely needs to be a statement or some initiative in order to look at getting people more into a single family home, in order to build up their net worth, to find some ownership, those sorts of things. But to have any type of peg, a number in there or anything along those lines, I have a hard time digesting that. In addition to that, I don't know what it's like on the Senate side. I refer to my colleagues, but there's not much of an appetite for tax credits in terms of coming up in this next budget year and doing that. Is it possible for us to stir the pot to look at that, particularly just focus in on affordable housing? Sure. I mean, I'd be happy to help have those discussions on the House side, but have any type of amount in here or those sorts of things, I would really caution not to do that.
Look, I'm trying to
Oh,
figure out here a couple
Ohio.
of things. Mary Ann, if I can just ask something here. I'm appreciating that some of you are promoting single-family homes and some are promoting maybe other forms of residence. Are you all suggesting that the state should not support those who are interested in apartments? Because I'm curious to know what the basis of that kind of, frankly, intrusion into personal choices like that.
I don't think anyone's saying that at all.
Okay, so then,
Yeah.
so affordable housing then would be, to the extent there's a recommendation, there would be all kinds of homes that would be affordable, single family as well as.
That's the hope.
Okay.
That's right. We need a diversity, which we do not have in Louisville right now.
Okay,
That's the question.
yes.
So
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know Ohio.
Hold on,
just
Mary Ann.
passed-
Jacory's hand's been up for a long time.
I'll just add,
Okay.
as you work on the language about homeownership versus renters, I know we're not doing just the needs in Louisville, but the housing needs assessment has a very comprehensive breakdown of the need for renters and for homeowners. And it actually shows that the more you earn as a homeowner, there's more unmet need for homeowners. So there's already data around what the need is. Hopefully we can finesse that and make it match what the rest of the state needs as well. But that data exists for Louisville.
Who else was?
I was just gonna,
Hands
I
up.
was just, I was just gonna say that Ohio recently passed something similar to this. We'll work on getting the language for you, but they did $100 million. And it's 50 million for multifamily and 50 for affordable. And multifamily doesn't necessarily have to be apartments and renters. It can be condos, it can be patio homes.
Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is maybe something that we should take up when Scott gets here too. Reason being, I'm noticing as I'm flipping forward on this, first of all, let me just say, I'm in support of, again, I think we hear broad consensus support for the idea of affordable housing, maybe not being as specific on dollar amount or methodology. Maybe we can wordsmith that over the next week. And I defer to my friends and colleagues that have to live and work in Frankfurt for whatever is going to pass, right? It's something we can get that we're not trying to upset anybody while we're writing the report. As far as B, related to this concept of infill, I do want to point out that it's a repeating theme here. In addition to it showing up here in letter B, it shows up under, I don't even know how to number it, but the last economic development incentive line from Mr. Schoenberger points out basically the same thing, that there's a need. Now, again, how we word it, I'm certainly flexible on. It's more the acknowledgement, and this is something maybe not something we talked in depth here on. I'll just reveal that I know now Council President Winkler and I have discussed this at length at council related to the problem and the reason why we see so many developers going outside of the city and going to greenfield areas has to do with the complexity and lack of essentially cost differentiators that allow them to build profitably in infilled areas. And what that ends up is you see in many suburban areas in the city, brand spanking new developments of all sorts, single family homes, multifamily homes, and all of this. And many of those residents saying, please slow down. And meanwhile, we have areas in the more urban areas of the city that are going blighted, that no developer is looking at because of this cost differential between greenfield and existing infill development. So I do want to point out, it wasn't just coming up with Ms. Butler's, it was coming up also with Mr. Schoenberger. Of course, we want to wait for him to get here, but there may be a theme developing here from multiple commission members.
So, Mr. Chairman, I've got a recommendation. I make a recommendation that that you and I have listened to this. I think we're largely in agreement. My recommendation is that we go back and draft something that we can consider next week with a more general recommendation to the General Assembly about affordable housing and homeownership, and incorporate Ms. Butler's recommendation here as an example of what the General Assembly could do, and incorporate what Mr. Schoenberger has mentioned on page 3 with respect to conversion of existing office buildings into multifamily. So my recommendation is that we take the roll on that, get language back to the commission next week, and we move on to the next item.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, would you please call the roll?
Can you clarify to me, what are we voting on the item so I can type it up there?
It's on affordable housing.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Jason Nemeth?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Oh,
I didn't know, I was going to make another comment. I didn't know you're voting.
I think we're voting.
Earl Jones?
Yes.
Harold Neal? Earlier. Julie Rocky Adams?
Aye.
Mike Nemes?
Yes.
Ken Fleming?
Aye.
Pamela Stevenson?
Yes.
Anthony Piagentini?
Yes.
Ja'Cory Arthur?
Yes.
Cindy Fowler?
Yes.
Marianne Butler, Shelby Williams Somerville,
Yes.
Scott Schoenberg, Bonnie Jung,
Aye.
Don Dreisbeck.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 14 yes votes.
Now, there are some other economic incentive recommendations here having to do with with incentivizing companies that are not manufacturing focused. I think one of those is from Mr. Schoenberger. We can hold that off maybe, but I think Ms. Somerville had one as well.
Yes, Scott and I are very similar. I thought Mary Ann also might have mentioned something around this, but as I'm sure you all know, the Kentucky Business Investment Program, the KBI program, is one of the most popular incentives at the state level. Right now, it's focused more on manufacturing companies, so projects that are more capital intensive. We want those in Kentucky, but there's a lack of incentives for more business services and technology companies at the state level. And so something that we think would be a good idea is including software subscriptions or licensing fees or other initial software and licensing costs that are associated with new full-time jobs that are created in these companies to go towards that minimum investment in the state that the company needs to make in order to get an incentive. So I believe it's $100,000. Usually a company will meet that with physical assets or equipment or a building. But for a lot of these business service and technology companies, that's hard to do because they don't take up a lot of space, but they have high-paying jobs, and we want to incentivize them to come to the Kentucky. But if we change some of the eligible costs so that they can meet that threshold, it'll help us attract them.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a recommendation. I don't think this is a controversial one, so I want to go ahead, not to cut off discussion early or anything like that. But I'd like to make a recommendation that we combine Ms. Somerville's recommendation, which begins on the bottom of page 2, with Mr. Schoenberger's recommendation that begins on page 2. It's the third full field. It's his first one. Combine those two and then come back to the commission with language that aggregates the two thoughts. That's my motion.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yep. The General Assembly to consider, create, revise, is how it begins with Ms. Somerville's.
Okay. Comment?
Question, I'm not familiar with this statute. How does this address remote work? And we talked about this a bit ago in the council. If somebody works outside of Louisville, how are we making sure we capture that occupational tax from them? If they work in Louisville remotely, what does that look like? So I'm just curious if that addresses this at all.
I'm a little rusty on this, but I believe unless the state has an agreement with Kentucky, they still have to pay the occupational tax here. Do you know that, Rep?
So you pay the occupational tax of wherever the work is performed. For example, my business is in Louisville, and so I pay the Louisville occupational tax. But if I do work in Oldham County, let's say I have a client in Oldham County, or I go to court in Oldham County, I would bill those hours in Oldham County, and I would pay Oldham County's occupational tax for the work performed there, not Louisville's.
You pay where you work.
Understood. And then just to follow up on that, is there a threshold between the physical property and acquisition versus what's software?
It's not really included at all right now. It's mostly just physical assets. So we're trying to include those for the eligible cost to get to $100,000.
Understood. And maybe that's a discussion we have when we work on the language, just to make sure somebody can't, only spend on software and then the physical property that we're looking to get some value out of is absent. Thank you.
So
Part of the
your point is you want to make sure that the incentives are going to assets located in Kentucky?
Not necessarily. I'm just questioning, should we prioritize that? Almost how we just talked about home ownership versus renting, making sure there's a percentage of the tax credit. Should we also make sure there's a percentage of physical acquisition and property versus what's just software?
Agree.
I see. Okay.
Fleming?
Part of the challenge of what we're discussing here is remote working, what you mentioned. And you can work anywhere, particularly in the software, you can work anywhere in this world. And we won't get any occupational tax. We will get the revenues, by having, paying net profit tax or whatever from the company standpoint. But that's just something to be mindful of. I don't know what they're, who they're going after and so forth. And I hope they, success in whoever they try to land, but just be mindful that as we go forward, we may not get those occupational tax because they're not here in Louisville or in Kentucky.
Chairman, I
I'd
got
say
a
that
motion.
may be true, but some of them may also work here. I mean, it's not all remote work.
Got a motion and a second. I'll call the question. Let's vote.
Let's vote.
Got to move.
Ed,
Say that one more time.
ABIKDI.
Jason Nemus,
Yes.
Earl Jones,
yes.
Gerald Neal, Julie Rocky Adams, Mike Nemus,
Aye.
Ken Fleming,
I have a question. I don't want to say point of order or personal privilege. I thought Chairman Nevis said we're going to combine these later on, or did y'all change that and I just missed your
Oh,
comment?
we're going to combine those and bring you back with the language.
So also with Scott's information too?
Yeah.
So we're voting on his as well?
Yes.
Yes. On the concept.
Okay. Aye.
Pamela Stevenson, Anthony Piagentini,
Yes.
Corey Arthur,
Yes.
Cindy Fowler,
Yes.
Marianne Butler,
Yes.
Toby Williams Somerville,
Yes.
Scott Schoenberg, Bonnie Jung, Sean Dreisbeck.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 14 yes votes.
Thank you. Well, there are a number of recommendations regarding TARC and TARC services. I think there are a total of 4, if I count correctly. Would those who propose those want to address them?
Oh.
And specifically, are there recommendations for, I'd like to know, to whom are the recommendations addressed? Is it for legislation? Is it for the council, Metro Council? Is it for the mayor's office? Is it for the TARC board? Who's the recommendation to be made to?
So, Mr. Chairman, my recommendation, which is the first one on the list, is a recommendation that we ask the Metro Council to study issues to improve TARC. I think what we've heard is that it doesn't adequately serve areas all around the community, or really adequately serve pretty much any area in the community. The funding has been rising consistently, but the ridership has been decreasing consistently and both pretty much exponentially. This is a local responsibility, not a state responsibility. So any recommendation that the state fund things, I don't think has got any legs in Frankfurt. So I think if we're going to include anything on TARC, and I'm fine with not, but if we're going to do anything on TARC, I think we need to make a recommendation that the Metro Council, Metro government, including the mayor, take a look at TARC and fix the significant problems with it.
A clarification, when you say you're not prepared maybe to make a recommendation on TARC, meaning not even to the Metro Council?
Metro Council, I don't think, this is a local responsibility. The state pays some money, but it's not consistent and it ought not be.
Okay, understood.
I think my colleague has much more knowledge on this than I do, but I just wanted to say, if we are going to look at it, I'm not sure what power we have to actually make changes because of the way that TARC is governed.
And if I may, until we increase funding, I know funding has gone up in the last 50 years, but the rate hasn't increased. It's just, because of property taxes and, it's not going to get better until we really fund, some changes.
Well, the particular one now being discussed, Ms. Fowler, is that the matter be looked at by the Metro Council. Do you support that? I mean, is that adequate, or are you suggesting that we add?
I don't know. I mean, so can we increase the tax burden, or do we have to go to the state for some of that?
From my perspective, I would not I strongly oppose any increase of funding to TARC. Their funding has increased 38%. When you take inflation into account, funding is not the problem. It's a broken system. I don't know what the problems are, but it's not funding. They went up $32 million or 38% and that is considering, it's already taken into account inflation. Money's not the problem. They don't need more money. They need better management.
Anybody have another comment on this one?
Should we add in, just based on the conversation, should we add in that Metro Council not only look at the routes and how to be more efficient, but should they look into how it's, what the jurisdiction in, what the governance is of TARC? So why don't we add that in as governance?
I'll just weigh in and say this. I share Co-Chair Nemus's concerns about the ridership and the funding. And I'll give you a perfect example of one of the problems. A lot of the residential development that has exploded in the East End, during the approval process of most of those developments, they would talk about how if you build them, you'll get more TARC routes, and the exact opposite happened. We got less TARC routes. During the pandemic, they contracted greatly through my district, even through industrial and heavy residential areas, and none of those stops have come back. Forgetting East End, even in downtown and other areas, TARC has just even a recent track record of complete unreliability. We have been yelling at them probably for the past 2+ years, maybe 3 years, about TARC 3, which is the process in which they move people with disabilities around the city. That has been just horrible. And really, they're barely, I think, 2 years out from one of the worst scandals that TARC may have ever been through, with a leader that, although we focused and a lot of the media focused on his sexual harassment and I believe sexual assault, I'll say alleged. I don't think he's been actually tried and convicted of it. I would just say that's my opinion of what he was ultimately accused of. What didn't go as well reported was the grotesque fiscal mismanagement that happened under that period of time. Now, I'm not saying the current leadership is anywhere near there, and I would say that there's probably been some improvements, but I would be very, very careful of leaning on the state too much related to this, because, I mean, unless there's going to be some kind of state, unless we're going to accept state intervention, we have to be careful as a city government. You accept more state money or intervention, you must accept how they will then manage it and tell you what to do. And it's no offense to any member of state legislature here, but, you know, we just would have to accept that as a condition of that. And I'm not sure we want to do that as a city. I think this is one of those areas I will 100% agree with Senator Neal. I don't think we have full information other than to say a recommendation for more study and a real hard look at it. That's probably the extent that I would like to go in what we need to do with TARC.
I think
clearly is an issue.
Is from the co-chair that that's take place at Metro Council. Would you prefer that it take place someplace else?
No, I would prefer it. I would prefer that the city do it. And you say Metro Council and the mayor's office, maybe that's the only adjustment I would make. I think it needs to be a metro government activity that the mayor's office must engage in. But other than that, I would prefer it, again, short of, and again, we would need more information to make this recommendation. I think Senator Racky Adams makes a point about governance. If there was a way that we could get more control over governance, I might be open to that. But again, I don't know if we have enough information to specifically say that yet beyond, we need to look more at it. Thank you.
Well, I think we can say, as the senator said, that governance could be part of this recommendation as a matter that the council should take a look at. Okay.
Corey, I just wanted to add, I would support that as well. I use the Housing Authority as an example. The executive director is appointed by the mayor. We don't necessarily have that same power with TARC. So as we look at it, let's talk about it.
Any further discussion of this one?
I make a recommendation that we use the language that we have already. We add in some language from Julie about governance issues and from Tony and Jacory in the discussion that we just had. Come back with some language next week.
Second.
Okay, let's call a vote.
Lord, the language you said the language we have.
The language we have on your recommendation, Mr. Fleming.
Okay.
Right. That's the starting point.
Jason Nemus,
Yes.
Earl Jones,
Yes.
Gerald Neal, Gerald Neal, oh, sorry, Julie Rocky Adams, aye. Mike Nemus,
Aye.
Ken Fleming, Pamela Stevenson,
Yes.
Anthony Piagentini,
Yes.
Ja'Cory Arthur,
Yes.
Cindy Fowler,
Point of personal privilege. So I really feel like that money is an issue on this subject. And I also think that until we fix this, our city's not going to move forward to be what we can be without public transit and good public transit. And you have to invest in that. Present.
Mary Ann Butler,
Yes.
Shelby Williams Somerville,
Tark is a member of our organization, so I'm abstaining from this vote.
Scott Schoenberg, Bonnie Jung,
Yes.
Sean Dreisbeck,
Yes.
Mr. Neal, I didn't get your vote. There you go, sir. Is your vote yes? Okay, I'm just confirming. Thank you so much, sir. Let's see what you've got. You've got 12 yes votes, 1 abstention, and 1 present.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I believe the next one on our list, if we're going in order, is EMS. I think that's going to elicit much more of a conversation. We have one person who's not joined us yet. So my recommendation is to go to the next one. We're on page 4. Go to the next one that says taxing authority. We'll come back to the EMS for a more thorough discussion. That's my recommendation. And I don't think that the next one's controversial.
Let's move on to taxing authority then. Now, this is, again, a recommendation from Mr. Nemus and Mr. Fleming. Do you all want to address this one?
Go ahead, Ken.
I think what Co-Chairman Nemus mentioned, that we'll go ahead and withdraw this suggestion, this recommendation. I think we recognize that there an impact, to what degree we don't know, to Louisville Metro government. If some portion or some structure were to change in that scenario. So based on that and based on what we read from the mayor's office, I think we had to just withdraw this suggestion, and maybe look at something down the road. I'm not suggesting put that language in there, but anyway, I think it is recognized we need to be conscious of that, but also recognize that there are individuals who pay twice. I mean, 2 occupational taxes. But in any event, that's the only thing I just want to mention, that we'll probably go ahead and withdraw this, our recommendation.
No, this one isn't the one we're withdrawing.
Right. I think, yeah, I just wanted to clarify we're on the right one. I think we acknowledge we're
Yeah,
withdrawing
so-
the stacking, but I thought we were talking about tax.
Yeah, so we're talking about the sales tax situation.
I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about stacking.
I apologize.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Um,
We're on page 4, the last one on page 4 that begins, the commission recognizes that local governments.
Oh, I'm sorry. I flipped the page on you already. So, well, anyway, my previous statement will still probably stand.
Sorry. But no, we're not recalling this one. So
Yeah, I think this has been discussed. I'm sorry.
okay, this is not the one we're withdrawing. This is the one that for decades now, all of us, both sides of,
Should we just address the one he just?
yeah, yeah. I don't know what he just,
Well, I took it that we were talking about the stacking, and I thought we talked about that prior to that. I can address.
Well, if you want to address the
Local
stacking
government.
one, if you want to go to the stacking one and withdraw it, let's just do that.
Okay,
Get that gone.
we don't need to vote on it since nobody's bringing it up.
Right, it's gone.
Yeah.
So now if you want to address the one that's still on the table, at the bottom of page 4.
okay, thank you, Chairman. So I think there has been discussions throughout the years when it comes to local governments having the flexibility to have a little more diversity in taxes and so forth. And as you might know, that's going to take a constitutional change. I anticipate, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I anticipate that, that will be discussed in terms of having a constitutional language that's drafted up and put forth and passed through the General Assembly in order to have it on the ballot next November. So I think we would all agree that, that we need to look at having some type of a little more diverse taxing structure. But also, we need to be mindful of looking at offsets in order to compensate for one particular tax that's being implemented. Should we offset and look at offsetting that with another tax? Like, for example, if there's a local option sales tax of like 1% or 2% or whatever, then should there be an offset? And I promoted this in the past on numerous occasions, there ought to be an offset from occupational tax. That's going to take some calculations. That's going to take some I guess, economic analysis in terms of what the effect would be and all that. But generally speaking, Mr. Chairman, I think I think we ought to say we support the General Assembly moving forward with some type of local, with the local option, or giving local governments the option to have the discussion and put forward to their voters a local option sales tax. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much. Very clear.
Second.
Is there any discussion of this item? Please.
Ken, are you only talking about a local option tax that would be for a specific project and then would go away like Oklahoma City has? Or would this just be a local sales tax? Like Illinois has a local sales tax that their cities can charge another penny on top.
Mary, that's a good question. That's looking way down the road. I think right now, I would like to suggest our commission say, look, we need to move forward with some type of constitutional language to vote on it. And then after that, then you go through and discuss with the various cities throughout the Commonwealth how that would work if the citizens in the Commonwealth were to vote in affirmative of that. We can go through and look at the structure and so forth. So I'm not going to sit here and say how things are going to look and shape based on other states and so forth, but that's what I think we ought to look at. Just say, hey, we need to have General Assembly look at this and have a constitutional question put forth to the public.
Okay, now some of the other recommendations here regarding taxing authority deal with, without being specific as to the kind of tax, for example, talk about giving local jurisdictions more ability to determine certain taxing authority. Are we dealing with these? Do you believe we need to deal with these one at a time? Do you have a view on that, Mr. Chair?
I think Ms. Butler's on page 5, the third one on page 5, it has emboldened local tax control. I think that's one that is on here. I think Ms. Somerville's on page 5 that is headed local tax reform is also one that is effectively the same.
Now, these basically just, I don't think they're specific as to the kind of tax.
They're not. What section, amending section 181, that's what that means.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah,
Yes, please.
I want to make sure that we're on the right thing. We're talking about the giving or encouraging the General Assembly to present a constitutional amendment to allow local government to levy a sales tax. Is that what we're doing here?
Yes, sir.
Now, hold on. Is it a sales tax or is it to?
It says sales tax here.
I realize that's what it says in the one that Mr. Fleming read. I was pointing out that the others are not specific as to the kind of tax.
Well, the only
question is whether or not the motion here is to amend, is to provide for the Constitution to allow citizens to make a decision or the legislature to do something, or is it specifically to allow a sales tax?
Yes. The motion, I'm confused.
Mr. Chair.
I'm asking Mr.
What is
to clarify whether or not his proposal is.
Wait. What I'm asking is this the one we're dealing with as a deal with sales tax?
That's my question as well. I'm trying to clarify.
Shelby has an answer, but I've got an answer too. Go ahead.
I would just say I'd be in favor of a more general statement to have the General Assembly consider the constitutional amendment to modernize the entire local tax structure. That could include a sales tax at the local level, but it'd be modernizing, doing total local tax reform, as I mentioned in mine, rather than naming a specific tax.
And I think the only thing that's disallowed is the sales tax. They can already do the other things.
If
They
I
can do,
may,
they can do property taxes and occupational taxes. Sorry, Joe.
if I may, this is an example of what I'm talking about. We haven't done, as far as I can discern, any real dive into this for me to even get an understanding of what this means, other than to give somebody or suggest that, somebody go and give them a free hand or encourage them to do something that I haven't even looked at. And it's not aimed at anything that I'm, at least in the discussion I've had, I don't know what it's aimed at. And let me tell you, it's done in a context where we as a General Assembly actually are cutting down income tax. And there's a discussion as to how this has affected other areas when they go down on income tax. What do? They get into sales tax because they find that they have to supplement. And my point is, that may not even be so, what I just said. We haven't even looked at it. And we're going around encouraging the General Assembly to go down a road from this commission, looking at the framework of this commission in the context of what? Merge government. I think what we ought to do is defer this and look at this deeper and see what we're talking about.
I just want to add,
I'll pull it back.
this seems like an issue that goes back years that people have wanted to move forward on. You're just looking at the estimations for tourism, $830+ million worth of economic impact. And how much of that are we actually going to reap the benefit of? Kentucky Derby, Bourbon and Beyond Festival, the Kentucky State Fair. So many people are coming here. There was a recent article that said Louisville is the #1 travel destination in the country, and we're not reaping the benefits of folks who are coming into our city, enjoying it. So maybe if we want to be vague in the recommendation, we can, but there's some dollars we're leaving on the table.
If I may,
Please, yes.
that's all well and good. I haven't been part of that discussion. And here it has not been part of the discussion that I've been dealing with. And we are a commission. And part of the commission is for us to go through information and discern what it is as a commission. You may have knowledge that I don't have. Or maybe I raised it and I missed it. I don't know.
Pull it back.
Senator, my,
No.
and again, I'm just a citizen here. My information on that would be relevant to this question is, I think some of the data we've seen shows that we are, in comparison to peer cities, are very low taxed. And I think we've all agreed that the level of service in Louisville is very low. It's inadequate. And so I look at this as one way of saying that if there are ways of increasing funding, that is something which we should be able to consider. It doesn't say that we reduce taxes someplace else or that we undo something someplace else. It just provides a mechanism for increasing revenue to metro government. I mean, to the extent that you have a concern that other things being proposed here or that others may have in mind in the General Assembly might reduce funding, funds available to metro government, you have maybe a correct concern. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if we don't do this, they won't do that.
Look, I said I wanted more information, more discussion, so I can know what decision I'm making when I start encouraging General Assembly to do something.
I understand. What if?
I didn't say don't do it.
Okay.
We may end up doing it.
What information do we lack?
We have not had a discussion I've been part of. You can say we have.
Ms. Somerville.
I would just
William Somerville.
want to clarify, the first step in this process is a constitutional amendment. And in changing that, it's not going to mean there's an automatic sales tax. It's going to change it from being written in the Constitution to written in statute. So the General Assembly will have to come back and rethink the actual structure. So our recommendation for a constitutional amendment is not going to imply that any sales tax will be imposed. It's going to give the General Assembly the authority to rethink and reimagine local tax structure. So nothing will happen until you all say.
Mr. Arthur?
Assembly.
I just want to reiterate what we just heard, but the public hearings and all the written comments can be summarized in 2 words. Services suck. And in order to change that, we need to find some more money. So I just want to be very clear. We need to be flexible and creative with how we're raising revenue to actually take care of the fact that services are lackluster.
Mr. Piagentini?
Thank you. I'm going to try to whip on my best diplomatic mode here for 2 reasons. First of all, for those that represent the state and on this wonderful commission, and I respect all of you tremendously, and I respect everything you all do in the state. I've never been one to attack what happens in Frankfurt, right? Not, however, I would just like to point out that part of the reason, I would argue, that there's been inaction on this topic is because the organization that benefits the most from our tourism is Frankfurt. The organization that benefits nothing from tourism in this city, and it is a net cost, is Louisville. At Derby, we get precisely $0 of the dollars of everybody who buys a beer, who buys a hat, who buys a ticket, who stays in a hotel room. We get none of it. The 16 to 17% hotel tax, absolutely $0 of it.
Frankfurt doesn't get that either. That goes to Louisville Tourism.
No, the sales tax is part of the 17%.
Most of that
sales tax is part of the 17.
Louisville Tourism gets most of that, Tony.
No, they get another percentage above that. No, we do know. No, this is public record. You can Google it, right? It's nothing. And we have discussed, now, as far as what has been discussed, I know that, again, I can't speak for Senator Neal, so I am not saying what you know or have not been in. I will just say that I do know that many of my colleagues and respected members of Frankfurt have been debating this topic in one way, shape, or form for many years. This goes back to the Fisher administration asking for lost lift, whatever the acronym was, where he wanted this 1% sales tax, going all the way to more recently debating the constitutional amendment. And then finally, as far as this commission is concerned, we have discussed this. It was through the revenue data that was presented by our economists. It is very, very clear where we get money from, and none of it, $0, comes from sales activity or any consumption activity, which we all know is differentiated from other jurisdictions. So I'm surprised to hear that we're saying we haven't discussed. I would argue we have discussed it enough to make a recommendation that we need to begin the process of diversification. Ms. Somerville explains it perfectly. It is what we're recommending here is we begin the process to allow it the way the Constitution is written, which may have made it, again, not going to second guess some of the founding fathers of Kentucky and why they wrote the Constitution the way they did. But they wrote it in a way that makes it legally impossible for us to even have the conversation. And that's what we're recommending to change, to allow the Constitution to even allow us the ability to have a conversation politically about what we can do. So to be clear, I would not recommend a dollar amount and all that because to your point, Senator Neal, we don't have enough information. How we would do it, don't have enough information. But we can't even have the debate, the discussion, or any intelligent rapport on it until we have the constitutional amendment passed. And I think that's the point, to allow the Constitution, to allow the state legislature, and then ultimately local jurisdictions to even discuss it is what I think we're recommending here. Thank you.
Any further conversation or discussion?
Is that what we're recommending? Is that in fact what we're going to put in the language?
Which, when you say that.
What he's saying about the constitutional ability?
Yes, to recommend
Okay.
constitutional amendment to allow a vote on the
Yes.
question of
Thank you.
reforming the authority of local governments, the authority of local governments to enact taxes of one kind.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a recommendation I think that resolves the issue. We'll see. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Stevenson.
So I think we're talking about two different things. I agree with your need to have some of the tourism dollars so we can do things, which is pretty ironic given that we just reduced the income tax that's not going out to Louisville. Number two, should the citizens bear the burden of higher taxes depending on where they live and where they work so we can get tourism dollars? It's very, very dangerous to tell Frankfurt to do anything without facts. It's very dangerous to tell them to change the Constitution and then we'll figure it out as we go along.
But how do we get to figure it out if we don't change the Constitution?
You can have the conversation. You can talk about this stuff. We did lift. There is a way to come up with a plan without, and then you go change the Constitution. This is sort of backwards. We want
But
to
would you-
change it and then figure out what to do. Figure out what we need, and then you'll know how to change it.
Are you saying you would prefer if the recommendation were for a constitutional amendment to allow a sales tax?
No, what I'm saying is don't mess with the Constitution. Most lawyers know you don't touch it until you know the impact of changing it. Once you know the impact, then you can say, this is how we want to change it. Do the thinking before you go changing age-old documents. I don't mind changing it, but man, it's very dangerous to say, let's just change it and then we'll figure it out.
Let me be clear. I'm not talking about the final outcome at some point in time to do whatever. I want to make this clear. Because the way we are structured does have some challenges, and there's some opportunities locally that we don't get because of the way we're structured. I understand that. All I'm saying that from my standpoint, the intelligent way to approach this, if we have a commission and a responsibility, that we would delve into those subject matters and discuss them. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I would note, Mr. Chairman, if I could, the House has passed this twice, and Ms. Stevenson voted for it. So I think we know what we're going to do. It's already been there, and we voted for it. You voted for it. It was House Bill 475 in 2022. So we voted for it twice already, and so I don't know. I understand we're getting worked up, but we know what we're talking about here. So, Ja'Cory.
Could you clarify something for me, please? Once the Constitution is changed, wouldn't it be up to the local governments, the legislative body, the Metro Council to actually implement sales tax?
Here's how it went right now. So the House passed it twice, the Senate hasn't. It's to submit it to the people to give the opportunity for diversification, which includes sales tax, because right now Louisville can't levy a sales tax. That's right. No city can't. So it's to change that. Then the General Assembly would give local jurisdictions, Crestwood, Louisville, Middletown, pick your city, the opportunity to have a sales tax. This is supported by League of Cities. It's supported by CAECO. It's been supported by Abramson for 30 years. This is something that is not new.
Right.
And has been vetted pretty thoroughly.
My point in asking that is just to put out a promise that if the people want to do this, when we put it on the ballot, if the General Assembly says, yes, you can do it, I promise you that the Metro Council is not going to implement something that is going to hurt locals. We will study every city possible before we introduce anything that is going to damage the people who are supposed to benefit from this. And I'll just point out some irony here. I represent Metro Council District 4. And depending on how you look at the revenue, most of the money is made in our district. You represent Senatorial District 33. Most of the money is made in your district. Why are our people not benefiting from that money that is getting made?
I'm not arguing any of that. You're apparently not listening to what I'm saying. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking generally with responses. I did not say I'm opposed to a particular outcome, but I do know that when we put something before the people as a constitutional amendment, it depends on the wording of that particular piece. And if we're going to recommend some general thing, that's one thing, perhaps. But if we haven't looked at it ourselves and make that recommendation or make that part of the recommendation, at least give guidance on it, it does not make a lot of sense to me. So, that's me. Now, if you don't, others may feel comfortable here because this is the last point I'm going to make on it, because what I'm arguing is the process primarily. I'm not arguing necessarily the outcome. So I'm done, but the responses I keep getting get to, well, we need this, we need this. Well, no, I'm talking about the responsibility of the commission and the process we're undertaking. That's what I'm talking about. I'm done.
Mr. Arthur,
Do we have the language from the last two times the House voted on that?
we're looking at it right now. That's why.
And if we're going to make this recommendation, could we maybe mention that language or put
Well,
it to the record?
The Supreme Court made us put the whole thing in there, so it's 2 pages, 2 full pages.
It's House Bill 475.
Right.
And basically it pertains to sales tax
Yep.
and nothing else.
The General Assembly, well, I mean, I can send it to everybody, but to
Well,
make it,
I mean, the ballot question.
well, the Supreme Court made us put the whole thing on there, so. Mr. Nemus,
A couple things is tourism, you might not get direct dollars from it, but you do get the occupational taxes and the property tax of the
no, I mean,
of the hotels and that are.
we're getting way down the
You
line.
don't want the tourism, we'll bring it to Bullitt County. But, but I hear a lot of people wanting to vote no or withdraw this recommendation. So what I want to know what we're voting on is to say this commission wants House Bill 475 passed again by the House and the Senate to pass it, or if we vote no, we don't want that. Correct?
Well, that wasn't where we started, but that may be where we wind up.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make a recommendation? I think the resolves, I want to make sure, you want, to make sure Gerald's listening. Oh, go ahead. Are we gonna fight over tourism, which is not even what we're talking about?
Okay.
Okay. Gerald, can you listen to this? I'm going to make a recommendation. I think it resolves our issues. Maybe it doesn't, but here's my recommendation. Take the language from, obviously I'm going with mine and Ken's recommendation. I'm going to delete a sentence that I think is the thing that people are struggling with. My language tries to incorporate what Shelby has and what Ms. Butler and Ms. Fowler have as well. If it doesn't, then tell me. Here's my recommendation. We're going to delete one sentence, so I'm going to read it without that sentence. If you want to look at number 4, page 4, the bottom recommendation on page 4, and it will read thusly. You'll see I'm taking out one sentence. The commission recognizes, Tony, listen, Tony, y'all can talk about tourism later. It's not part of the discussion here. Here's my recommendation. I'm going to take out one sentence. Bottom of page 4. The commission recognizes that local governments, including Louisville Metro and the suburban cities in Jefferson County, are restricted in their ability to levy a diversity of taxes to both meet the needs of their citizens and to incentivize economic development. Currently, local governments are largely dependent upon property and occupational taxes. The commission believes a more diverse tax structure is desirable to meet the citizens' needs. Delete the next sentence. I think that's the problem, Gerald. I think. Delete the next sentence and then go back on text. The commission further encourages the General Assembly to ensure that it does not result in an overall increase in taxes, but that it rather results in an offsetting or diversification of taxes to encourage economic development and fairness in the payment of taxes. We can add in there that it adequately addresses service needs. Okay. Does that address your concerns, Gerald?
Well, before the Senate answers that question, no.
Put your motion on the floor and I'll do what I do.
So my motion is that we pass that. We're going to add, Earl and I will add in the last sentence that we add that address service needs, and that we delete the sentence that I didn't read. It read before, therefore the commission encourages the General Assembly to present a constitutional amendment to allow local government to levy a sales tax. So what that does is it would incorporate opportunities for sales tax, restaurant, to all the stuff that I think everybody has made recommendations of.
And why does it say including Louisville Metro and the suburban cities in Jefferson County?
Because J-Town should be able to, all cities in the state that would.
So local governments doesn't capture that?
I can't hear you.
Local governments doesn't capture that?
What, we could, certainly, so. Well, so we could do local governments and delete including Louisville Metro and the suburban cities in Jefferson County. Okay, is that what you want, think, Pamela? What's that? So we're gonna delete the comma and then the language, including Louisville Metro and the suburban cities in Jefferson County. And then the second comma, delete all that. So that first sentence will read, the commission recognizes that local governments are restricted, and then continue the text.
So you're taking out that one sentence that pertains to the sales tax, and you're relying on or referring to diversity of taxes, which means restaurant tax, which means a bunch of other things. Is that correct?
It means the General Assembly should take into account all those things to let local governments have a diversity, have a bunch of options on how they can meet the needs of their local residents. What's that? Go ahead.
To be clear, as opposed to two. Because
Right.
right now what the Constitution allows is two. Property, occupation, that's it. Period, full stop, end of conversation. Everything has to fall into those buckets. Even the insurance premium tax technically falls into the occupational tax bucket, but it's the occupation of insurance, right? So
I get that. I get that. You're talking about like having a restaurant. Right now, fourth and fifth class cities, I believe, have restaurant taxing authority. You're
only,
talking about Metro Louisville having the authority to do a restaurant tax or any other tax that besides the sales tax. Because right now in the General Assembly, they're only focused on sales and that's it, nothing else.
Again, we're not supporting the restaurant tax or the sales tax here. What we're supporting
It's been
is,
brought up though.
I understand that. What we're supporting is having the General Assembly allow local governments to have diversification taxes to meet their needs.
and I think this is the point of drawing the line, which I think there is some agreement here on being super specific versus making recommendations here, because we don't have everything sorted out, right? But no, I think this is exactly right. I mean, we need diversification. Whatever the state is talking about or the cities are talking about in restaurant tax has been brought up in different circumstances and all that stuff. I mean, it should be all on the table for a detailed conversation. And we don't have the time because we would all be sitting here for hours and hours and days, and we all have other jobs. But I think there is broad consensus that we do need the state legislature to take up the question of local jurisdictions having more diversity in tax bases. Because right now, there is none. It's two. And you know that, I'm speaking to somebody who is frankly the expert on and has been carrying the water in this in the State House. So I'm saying this more for the broader audience that, this extreme limitation that we have in the Commonwealth is very extremely unique amongst our border states. And quite frankly, I would argue what we're asking for is the same exact thing that the state itself has been going through a process of, right? The state has this diversified authority. Excellent, good, God bless. We don't have anything looking like that thing. So I think the rewording is great. Mr. Co-Chair, I would love to.
I have a comment. It's the phrase that does not result in an overall increase in taxes. So I just want everybody to be aware that then leaves open the option then that if other taxes are raised or if this tax is input, it goes into effect, then other taxes like the occupational tax would have to be reduced. And I wonder whether that is something which the body is prepared to accept.
I would say, and maybe just a very fine-tuned wordsmith, it is well documented that as a proportion of a person's income and expenditure, the lower on the socioeconomic scale you are, the more that a consumption tax can be as a percentage of your overall income and expenditure. The point there is that I would say that what we're attempting to accomplish, I think what the language is really trying to say is that we want to reduce the impact on the local tax basis, right? So your local citizen, your Louisvillian.
Get it?
Yeah, but I want to make sure we're not using language that says we're not trying to increase taxes in terms of the gross tax receipts, because that would go up, but that would be coming in from tourists, not on the backs of local taxpayers. So difference between rate and dollars. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we don't want to raise the tax on the person that lives in Jefferson County. I
Right.
agree with that. But hopefully the revenues explode.
We've had the discussion. Is any further discussion?
I got a motion on the table.
Let's vote.
So what's the last sentence going to say about services?
The commission further encourages the General Assembly to ensure that this does not result in an overall increase in taxes, but that it rather results in an offsetting or diversification of taxes to encourage economic development, comma, fairness in the payment of taxes, comma, and meets the service needs of its citizens.
Meets the service needs.
Or anything, if you have Any other language I'm fine with. Because I think we're,
As long as that's clear.
and we'll present it next week so we can. And Jared, you got a week to study. You got a week to study it. I've got a motion on the table. Anybody second it?
No further discussion. Let's vote, please.
Jason Nemus,
Yes.
Earl Jones, Gerald Neal, Julie Rocky Adams,
I have a point of clarification. The only, to the co-chairs, the only sentence we're removing from this recommendation is, therefore, the commission encourages the General Assembly to present a constitutional amendment to allow local governments to levy a sales tax.
That's the only sentence, but Pamela also suggested, and I put that in my motion, that we delete the language in the first sentence. It says, including Louisville Metro and the suburban cities in Jefferson County, because local governments encompasses that. So no change in intent there.
Okay, well, we just took everything out, but I guess I'm a yes.
Mike Nemus,
No.
Ken Fleming,
I will vote yes, but I tell you, not to include what the statement is in terms of the constitutional amendment to allow the levy of sales tax, that's exactly what we did. And if you take that out, I don't think that's right. I think we need to stay focused on what's going on. I understand what Tony said about that in terms of giving the local government, because I've been there before. But I will vote reluctantly yes, and I think that sales tax should be, that sentence should remain in there. But the only thing I'm voting for yes is that the last sentence on that page 4, the commission further recognizes General Assembly is sure that this does not result in overall increase in taxes, but it rather results in a offsetting or diversification of taxes. That's the only reason I'm going to vote yes for this.
Pamela Stevenson, Anthony Piagentini,
And if we're explaining votes, I agree, I would keep that language in there. My point is, I think the sentence prior, there's no other way to read it than to say, we need a constitutional amendment. It reads, the commission believes a more diverse tax structure is desirable to meet the citizens' needs. There's literally no other way to get there than the constitutional amendment. So I'm a yes.
Ja'Cory Arthur,
Before I vote, I just want to make sure our friends in the state agree with that, that it's implying a constitutional amendment. It doesn't say it, but it implies it. Okay, yes.
Cindy Fowler,
Yes.
Mary Ann Butler,
Yes.
Shelby Williams Somerville,
Yes.
Scott Schoenberger,
Yes.
Bonnie Jung,
Yes.
and Sean Dreisbeck.
This is called multitasking, guys.
Sean Dreisbeck.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairs, you have 12 yes votes, 1 no vote, and 2 present votes.
Thank you.
Made changes to get the consensus and didn't get it. Maybe that won't happen again.
Okay.
Point of privilege, just to make sure, I know we talked about those 3 categories of what we're voting on today. Does that go into the, we'll continue discussing this next week pile? Or are that
Because we have to
consensus and
work
we move on? Okay, all right.
On language, yes.
Mr. Chairman, the next one, if I could, it says placeholder needs work. I just want to get the concept. I know that there are people that are working on this that we can bring back, but I want to get the concept in place. And I don't think this will be controversial, but we'll see. So what House Bill 314 did last year was it put together this commission, but it also said we're removing the restrictions we're in Jefferson County to incorporate or annex. A fear that many have had is that some will try to annex big business parks like GE, UPS, or Ford. And so I just wanted the sense of the commission, while you and I and others are working on language to present next week, that everyone agrees with that goal, to make sure that Worthington or Fincastle don't annex Ford just for the tax purposes. So I'd like to get a vote on that if there's any discussion, so we can then come back with language next week, but we already have a sense of the commission.
Mr. Chairman, are you voting on the 200 full-time employees? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, it's that concept. It says it needs work. I don't really want to vote on that language because that was a placeholder. But Earl and I are putting language together. We got some other people working on it as well that we can present that actually protects the GEs and the Fords of the world to make sure that when the annexations occur, that they don't get gobbled up for the purpose of taxes. Because what that will do then is it will take those occupational taxes away from Metro Louisville, which I don't think anybody wants.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we need to visit though, what size of small business is versus large. But yes, I agree with the concept.
Guess I just call for a vote to get the sense of the commission then.
Yes, let's go ahead and do that.
Jason Nemus,
Yes.
Earl Jones,
Yes.
Gerald Neal, Julie Rocky Adams, Mike Nemus.
Aye.
Ken Fleming, Pamela Stevenson,
Clarifying question, where did the number 200 come from?
We're not voting on that. That was just a placeholder to say, because I thought big versus not big. So that's not the number.
Present.
Anthony Piagentini,
Yes.
McCoy Arthur,
Yes.
Cindy Fowler.
I need clarification as well. So can you read what we are exactly voting on?
So there's no language we're voting on. We're voting on a sense of the concept of making sure that because we've allowed annexation and incorporation, now that's already in our statutes, that can begin next summer. That when that opens up, that we will recommend to the General Assembly to not allow annexation of big business parks. And the examples are GE and Ford. But there's no language in particular. We will vote on the actual language next week.
Cindy, just as a very specific example, Middletown comes this close to the East Point Industrial Park. Theoretically, they could annex just the park and nobody has to vote on it because there's no property owners in it, really, or like there's one vote. And they could just take all of that tax revenue potentially. We don't want that to happen.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
I said, well.
Mary Ann Butler,
Yes.
Shelby Williams Somerville,
Yes.
Scott Schoenberger,
Yes.
Bonnie Young,
Yes.
Sean Dreisbeck.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 13 yes votes and 2 present votes.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next issue here. And these have. Sorry. I think there's some additional taxing issues here. Make sure. No, we move on now to things that have to do with, I guess I've labeled them sort of government and board structure. There are a number of things that have to do with making sure that boards were represented by, adequately represented by residents from across the county. There were things that had to do with the authority or the way some of these boards operated. Others had to do with issues that specifically did deal with the authority of a restructuring of the actual government itself. So let's just start with taking a look at these. The first ones here deal with the issue of if and when votes are being taken on creation of new cities, that this notion of special districts be included or made well known to the general public, so that would be seen as an alternative to the creation of cities, should the citizens desire that. I think Mr. Arthur has one of those. Would you like to address it in any more detail?
Yes, and just for clarification, the recommendation that I had at the very end, you'll see some all caps bolded text. That's for a separate recommendation. So this one is specific to service district info. And it's really just saying if you're going to annex, create a service district, if you're unsatisfied with whatever your services are, that you must be informed about your options. And it really came out of think the Valley High School meeting, a lot of people were disgruntled about services, but it didn't seem like they were aware of their options. So we also have the same conversation when we talk about annexing certain parts of areas of unincorporated Louisville into suburban cities. This is really just an information requirement, and also making sure we have a department that is accountable for sharing that info and the financial impacts before people make those decisions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I like the idea, Councilman Arthur, of having somewhere that people can go, but I kind of seem to think that if you're going to talk about an annexation of an area, I would think that the seated council person within that district should be the one to give those folks what your services are and options. I'm all for smaller government. I just don't, I get the idea. I just don't know why we would have to designate a brand new department to do that when, you know, if something needs to be changed in the 18th or the 19th, then I certainly would go to Anthony. So could you just explain that just a little bit more for me?
I definitely don't have the intention of creating a new department. It's more so one of our existing departments taking ownership and making sure that that communication is clear and they know what their options are. And that could be with the council office. It could also be with planning and design services. It could be with economic development, community development. There's a few departments in different parts of the branches of government that we could assign it to. But as of now, it's like a hot potato and we're passing it back and forth. And there's a lack of clarity around what are the options and then who's helping communicate what those options are.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comment on this one? I have a question to the legislators who approved the statute. Is there some understanding about what kind of information is made available? I assume that this process would include a ballot. Someone would have to vote on this, right?
Right.
So who gets to determine what's on the ballot?
Well, so they have to have a certain amount of people, and I don't remember what it was, of the voters to sign a petition to put it on the ballot, and then 60% have to vote for it. And so it's a super majority of those who live in the area to be annexed or the area to incorporate that have to vote for it, which is what it is across the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Is there anything in the statute which would indicate whether multiple questions can be put on the ballot?
What do you mean by that?
Well, if one of the things is the residents of XYZ area, do you want to incorporate? I assume it's a yes or no question. Would they be also able to vote to say, would you prefer instead to have a special taxing district to do X or Y?
I'm not aware of any prohibition. Hopefully they wouldn't vote yes on both of them. It'd be inconsistent. But I'm not aware of any prohibition on that.
And do we know who would be in charge of ballot creation?
I'm assuming that would be the county clerk. Probably written by the county attorney, but I don't know.
Any further?
Just clarifying, did you write it so that it's a vote or a petition?
Both. Oh, we moved it around a lot. Let me go check it real quick.
Okay, because I would say it's actually a quite important distinction. If it's a vote, then to your point, Mr. Co-Chair, you can have both things at the same time. If it's a petition, you wouldn't. It would say, you know, just be a sheet, either electronic or written, and say, would you like to do this or this? And I would say that to Councilman Arthur's point, I was just saying to him that we could simply make it as part of the application process, just from a tactical point of view in Jefferson County, that when somebody's applying, you know, the city would just have a created document that said, we just want to inform you of your options. You can create a suburban city, you can create a services district. If you're adjacent to the urban services district, you can annex into that, sort of giving the constituents all options and making it publicly known while they're going through the process. I think that's a pretty simple thing to do, should be at least.
Chairman Nevis, I've got the petition to form a city must be signed by 66% or more of qualified voters. That particular area that is looking to incorporate must be 6,000 or more.
A minimum of 6,000 and 66%. It's done by petition.
Right. I think Mr. Piagentini's point is very well taken. The petition is is the beginning of the process. And his comment that if this concept is to be honored, the one we're discussing about special service districts, is to be honored, it would have to be done as part of the information provided to petitioners as to what their options might be. I would take it then that this request would be for information to be provided by the county clerk or by whomever in the city would be responsible for implementing these provisions.
Well, if it is just a petition, I don't know that it couldn't be made by the person that's walking around trying to get the qualified voters to sign it. I know Senator Neal's been waiting for a minute.
I might be a little confused here. It looks like we're talking about two different things. The state has made a law on incorporation and annexation. That's clear. We're not making any recommendation on that. The way I read this is Councilman Arthur has recommended that if a area wants to have USD services, that they can petition to do that and be annexed, as he says, annexed. I would just say as receiving those services. I think it's totally different from the annexation or incorporation that we've done in the state.
I think we agree with that.
So why are we bringing up what it takes to incorporate or annex from the state? Are you saying it should be the same to get services from USD?
I understood that the issue was that that people may not be aware of the fact that there's an option for a special district, and that as people are interested in improving their services, who believe that their option would be to create a city,
so
that they be provided information that says there are alternatives.
I agree. That's the way I read it. So what we're suggesting is that there would be, the Metro would reach out to the other districts that don't have their own and say, you can come into the USD if you want to.
I didn't understand that to be the issue. But I suppose the city can do whatever it wants, saying.
So the intent is to simply inform people of what their options are. And I just want to point out what might make this complex. Kentucky Revised Statute 67C.147, Section 4 shows that if you want to add or delete parts of the urban service taxing district, it can be done in two ways. A is a resolution enacted by Metro Council, or B, you have to have voters in a precinct. And this says 10% that cast votes in a general election. So that might be what makes it kind of complex, because there's different processes for different options. But I'm just simply asking, can we make sure we inform people about what those options are? And it sounds like the discussion has also turned into not only inform them about what the options are, but what is the process to actually implement those options?
Either one of them's fine for me. And we need to change the USD incorporation process to make it consistent with this one.
I'd support that.
So the options, the way it's written, maybe, and if you cover this, I apologize for not paying closer attention, but basically the options would be to join the urban services, or they can create their own. Is that correct?
It also join the urban services district, create your own, but also annex into a suburban city, as well as, I guess, start a suburban city as well. I mean, there's really those four options. So I'm just saying, let's inform people about what the options are and the process for those. If we want, we can totally get rid of this language and just adopt the concept of we need to inform people about the options and the process for each of those options, and make the options as consistent as possible for the process.
I like that. Inform of all options.
That's right, because the rights exist by statute already.
Right.
So we're not talking about repeating those or changing any law. What we're talking about is making information available to people as to what their options were under existing law.
So my understanding is Jacory has amended it to say it's informing before annexation of all options. Okay.
And the process included. Do you want to include the consistency, the 10% versus the 50%, or leave that alone for
I
now?
think that's a statutory issue. I think we should get into that at this point in time.
Okay.
Okay, please call the roll.
Jason Nemus,
Yes.
Earl Jones,
Yes.
Cheryl Neal, Julie Rocky Adams, Mike Nemus,
Aye.
Ken Fleming,
Aye.
Pamela
Sorry.
Stevenson, Anthony Piagentini,
Yes.
Ja'Cory Arthur.
I'm sorry, do we want to clarify that the information should be with an existing department and not a new one? That was a really valid point. And do we want to point out that agency or leave it open for now? Okay, I'll work on that this week. Yes.
Sorry. Cindy Fowler,
Yes.
Mary Ann Butler,
Yes.
Shelby Williams Somerville,
Yes.
Scott Schoenberger,
Yes.
Bonnie Jeong, and Sean Dreisbeck.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 15 yes votes.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on.
Mr. Chair,
yes.
I need to jump off of here soon. Can we take care of chapter 75 and then the EMS? Because I need to clarify some stuff that I suggested.
Okay, well, let's do the EMS first. I think that's a rather larger one. And then if we can get to the other one, Mary Ann. Let's see, we go back now to the EMS.
So Earl, before we do that, I think Ja'Cory has a clarification. Did we, so look, if you look on page 5, that's the one, the bottom of page 5 is the one we just covered.
Yes.
There's also one on 6. I don't know if we also covered that or something else.
Right, they just got mislabeled. So the one we just did was service district information. But we did not cover support, the support one or the transparency one.
So where are those, Ja'Cory?
I don't think they made it into this,
Okay.
because I don't see them.
They're not on page 6?
No. So the recommendation that I have second to last on page 6 is actually a copy of the one from the bottom of page 5. It's the same language, but it got copied. That's okay. So I'll work on the other ones and just make sure we talk about them next week. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry about that. Okay, EMS. I think we have to turn back in our document.
Yeah, so EMS, the supplemental that we've received cuts off a little bit. It cuts off the first sentence. And so the first sentence is the commission makes 3 recommendations related to Metro Emergency Management Services, and then it picks up from there. And so just for quick background, not to go too much, because I think everybody's been paying attention on this question. So the recommendation here from Representative Fleming and me is a recognition that the suburban areas have established, except for Fairdale and Shively, have established EMS services to be provided by the fire districts that they already had. And the reason we had to do that was because Louisville EMS wasn't providing adequate service to those areas. The people who live in those areas, St. Matthew, so forth, Fern Creek, pick your area. The people who live in those areas pay Louisville Metro taxes that go into the general fund to pay for Louisville EMS. They obviously, as I said, they're not getting those adequate services from Louisville EMS. So they had to then double up on their payment and, for those services and pay an additional up to 10 cents for Louisville, Chapter 75 EMS services. So what my recommendation is to say, let's recognize reality. And we have three different things, as I said. The first thing is we change Louisville EMS's primary jurisdiction into USD. That would make it the 4th USD service. The other 3s right now are fire, garbage, and lighting. This would make EMS the 4th USD service. The second, obviously, to be paid for, as all the USD services are by the people who live within the urban services district. The second of the 3 recommendations in this proposal is that because there will be a gap in the expenditures of what it takes to run USD services and the income from the USD property tax, that we have the suburban areas, even though they're not even legally allowed to get those services, to supplement those services inside the USD by 10% up to effectively 7 years from now, which is July 1st, 2030. The third recommendation is that we have all of the EMS service providers, which would be all of the Chapter 75s all around the county, and then it would also be Louisville EMS, to get together and come up with an interlocal agreement to pay, to account for payments when one makes a run into another. The final sentence says that we would like for, I think it, Commissioner Record, yeah, so the final area is that people should get, the service provider should get paid even if there's a non-transport event. Right now, they only get paid if there's a transport event, and that would be more helpful to Louisville EMS than anybody, I think, but helpful to everyone. So they can get paid when they respond, but they don't transport someone to the hospital. So those are the three recommendations that we have related to EMS.
Discussion, comments?
If I could, Mr. Chair, when I submitted these, I floated the idea of putting EMS back under Louisville Fire. And after talking more with Jody Myman after his presentation, I'm not sure that that's the best move right now. Jody was instrumental in helping to work out the fire department stuff when they help and back up one another. What I'd really like to see is more language that says Louisville Metro EMS will work with the suburban EMSs to come up with the same sort of plan they use with the fire departments and backing each other up. Louisville Metro does charge for non-transport if they show up and the person refuses transport. We need to encourage the others to do the same. And then the other thing we need to do is a really robust campaign, and I mentioned this in there. We did real well with getting people to call 911. Now we got to tell them exactly when they need to call 911. You know, it's not because you need a Band-Aid.
Mr. Chairman, I take the recommendations from Marion, and I would add to my recommendations what she has mentioned about having the service providers get together to come up with, what, Marion, how did you put it? Similar to what the fire departments already have? What's
Yes.
that? Well, okay, you can have clarification. I agree with that though. And I think that would come under number 3 of my recommendation. We can add that in. Tony.
Yeah, but I'm not suggesting that we take EMS and make it a USD only.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
I don't
I
think
can
Louisville Metro EMS should be a USD service only. We have
Okay.
the 60 ambulances. They just don't have the staff. We need to help them get staff and staff that stays.
So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, we need to be very, very clear with our language here. First of all, there's no need for interdepartmental agreements like we did with Suburban Fire and Louisville Fire, because unlike fire departments, state law requires all EMS to operate countywide regardless of who pays for it. That is not true with fire departments. So what happened with fire was you literally had Louisville Fire. If a suburban fire, and this happened multiple times, if St. Matthews had the closest fire truck, they would not alert St. Matthews Fire, they would alert Louisville Fire because it was within their jurisdiction, and they would take longer to get there than St. Matthews Fire would have. There's no statutory requirement for that level of cooperation, so we had to create that level of cooperation, which we have, and the administration has finally executed on that. That is not true with EMS. There is a state requirement. The minute you get a certificate of need from the state to operate EMS, you're required to operate countywide.
We had testimony of that.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's no need for cooperative agreements. You must provide the care. You could be coming from Prospect and going to Fairdale. It does not matter. You're required to do it. Now, I would say I'm in full support of the current language. I'm open to maybe some minor modifications, because what I want to say is, to address Ms. Butler's point, I don't disagree, but the administration, and this is really more the prior administration.
You don't disagree with what?
Her point about more staff for EMS. But there have not been serious moves by the administration, and not necessarily this administration. They've been here in political terms about 5.5 minutes, maybe 10 now. I don't know. But the but the prior administration did not make serious moves on their pay scales for EMS in their labor negotiations and contracts, which we were not against as a council. They have not made other serious moves to address that. The council has not done anything to prohibit them from doing it. This is addressing what is real, what has actually been happening, which is no matter what initiatives have occurred, Louisville EMS has contracted into the USD. That's not to say they never go outside or Suburban goes into there, but that is what has happened. And all this is doing is acknowledging the fact that has been happened for years now. But it still requires everybody to support each other. It's just financially acknowledging what has happened over years. And frankly, there is no information that indicates that any movement will change that in the near future. Or
When you say any movement, what do you mean any movement?
like there's been efforts to try to change the dynamics of the contraction of Louisville EMS related to staffing, related to equipment, related to all of this, and none of it has changed the fact that it's continued to contract into the USD.
So then are you saying then that you're in line with the idea that the services should acknowledge that fact?
100%.
Restrict themselves to the USD,
No,
aside from when they have to go outside as they do today.
we should not use the word restrict. It should be paid for. It's just a matter of accounting. The accounting should be paid for by the Urban Services District, which acknowledges where the cost is actually generally borne. Just like Middletown Anchorage Fire Department, which is my jurisdiction, I pay for that no matter where it goes.
Okay, so then we get it. So then the question then is, with respect to the proposal, the recommendation by Mr. Nemes, Mr. Fleming, you're saying you do not support the portion about restricting their services. So how would you propose?
That's not in my proposal. That's not in my proposal.
You can't make a
He's
restriction.
he's 100% with it.
Yeah, I'm with them. You can't make a restriction on their operations. You can only designate who's paying for it. And all this is doing, as I read it, and I'm glad to be corrected, is that we're acknowledging that it will be accounted for in the USD calculation, just like Middletown Anchorage Fire is only calculated for and paid for by taxpayers in the Middletown Anchorage Fire jurisdiction, even though they support the entire county.
Okay, so we're saying this provision then is a mutual reimbursement provision? Is that what it is?
So what we're talking about now is the third recommendation that, with respect to EMS. And what it says is the commission recommends that all EMS service providers in the county, along with the Chapter 75 fire protection districts that do not provide EMS services, that's Shapley and Fairdale, enter into interlocal agreements concerning reimbursements for services provided by one service provider to another area outside its primary jurisdiction. So with respect to that, all it means is that if Middletown goes into J-Town, for example, that they have an agreement where J-Town will pay Middletown for their costs.
Got it.
And for USD,
Same thing.
every,
All the same
that's right. Yes. Ja'Cory?
So can I
I'm sorry.
make sure I understand? So your proposal includes more than just number 3.
Oh,
we
well, that's what we were talking about. It does. It
Well,
includes-
point of personal, if you have a CON for the
That's not a
entire
point of
metro
personal.
area, how
Yeah, that's
can
just
you
debate.
charge?
Yeah, that's not a point of personal order. Let's go to Ja'Cory and then we'll definitely get your question, Mary Ann, but.
I have a lot more to add because this topic is scary to think about, unintended consequences, but I do want to read some input from the mayor's administration that we did receive. And it says, this would further fracture emergency services in the metro region and risk negative unintended consequences for the health and safety of Louisville families. It is short-sighted to upend our entire system for providing EMS services metro-wide to save suburban city residents less than 1 cent per $100 in property taxes. Under this recommendation, residents in the Urban Services District would experience an increase in property taxes by as much as 50%, and/or there would be a draconian cut in services that would negatively impact our community for generations. I just wanted to make sure his feedback was shared for the record, and I'll come back later.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
If you have a CON for the entire county, then how can you charge someone for going in their area?
You change the statute to say that, by the way, the CON requirement is a statutory requirement. So we would
Right.
change the statute to require payment if you go into another jurisdiction that's not your primary jurisdiction. So it's just an easy statutory change.
Why don't they just charge for non-transports?
They can't.
They're not allowed to. That's what we're
Not
saying.
allowed- Yeah, it's not allowed to, and that's what we're trying, mention that a couple of times,
If,
that we are looking
I
at,
thought,
we are
I
looking
thought
at.
we heard last week that, Louisville Metro does charge for non.
Louisville Metro has a different chapter that governs their operations than the Chapter 75s do.
That's correct.
So that goes down to Chapter 75 needs to be updated.
Yes.
That's right. And we have got a question into and a study requested to the Health and Family Services Department to look at how to compensate that, because you might have one responding, one gets there first and the other one doesn't get there. Or gets there but can't, doesn't do anything. Should they be compensated? Then you have one that gets there first and does not transport. So they're out the money. That needs to be somehow recognized and compensated. That's
So
part of
it's
the,
out-
that's part of discussion that needs to be had in this recommendation.
So to go back to Senator Neal's comments, we are nowhere near ready to make a recommendation other than we need to continue studying this and looking at it.
So I 100% disagree with that. We know exactly what we're talking about. We've been talking about it for a long time. And with respect to I also want to make sure that everybody knows that outside the USD will be subsidizing. Remember, they do not legally get these services. They can't. They will be subsidizing these services, USD, for 10% all the way to 2030. I think that's a very generous thing. And so, in fact, I don't think it should be in there, but I think we're doing it as a gesture of good faith.
I'm sorry, when you say they can't, what were you referring to? Were you saying that the USD can't serve outside?
The USD is not allowed to do the garbage in Middletown.
But we're talking about EMS.
Well, we're talking about all USD services when I'm talking about the 10% supplement.
And what is the basis? Why is it 10% versus 5 versus 30?
Well, probably should be 0, but I think the
But I
10%.
understand, but, okay, so what's the basis for the 0, the 5, the 10, or the?
Well, the basis for the 0 is they don't get the service. So they shouldn't be paying for a service they're not getting. The reason we say 10% is because we do want to make sure that our city thrives. We want to get them allow them to have 7 years to plan for this, to make sure that their expenditures match their revenues. And we want to make sure that they get on their feet in that way. That's the reason for the 7 years.
So you're saying then that the extent to which the USD does go out into the other areas is.
They'll get paid.
That so we paid for that.
That's number 3.
I'm sorry, Ken.
That's okay, Chairman. Just looking back historically, it's been, I think, $8 to $10 million. There's basically been upside down in the USD. And I think 10% based on the revenues that's generated from those 3 categories should more than compensate that range of deficiency for a while, at least for 7 years. So that's what I think the chairman came up with, roughly 10%.
Of course, we don't have any data that would suggest that. And
Well, we do have data because Dr. Coons gave that to us and we went through that calculation.
Sorry, which data are you referring to?
Dr. Coons basically laid out the cost of that, of each of these services that the USD generates in order to come up with it. There's one of his slides in his presentation.
That was the $14 million deficit from last year.
Yeah, I realize that number, but I guess I was trying to understand the question of what is the portion of that's EMS related?
None of it, because the EMS was not a USD service. We're making it a USD service. So with the 3 that they have, there was a deficit. EMS wasn't a part of that. So we make EMS part of USD, recognizing, as Councilman Piagentini said, the reality of what the actual operations on the ground are. Then it will become the 4th USD service.
Now, of course, I think we all recall that in testimony submitted by the city, by Mr. O'Brien, the city's position is that the contribution of funds from the water company more than cover any deficit that was identified.
Yeah, this is.
Mr. Chairman,
Let me finish. Was identified by the analysis that Dr. Coombs provided.
And I appreciate that, but I just don't think that revenue stream could be included and a target just for USD because everybody pays throughout the county those rates. And so, once again, there's another supplement, a subsidy going from the unincorporated areas into the area in order to help out with the metro, with the metro government could be distributed. How are they going to distribute? So to take the water company's revenue and say that that's part of it, then you really have to peel back the onion and look at some type of a formula in terms of whatever you want to do in order to see what that contribution would be. And that would be rather difficult to do that. But to take it to say $20 million, I don't think it's really fair in order to go through that process.
It's not only not fair, it's illegal, but it shouldn't happen. It mustn't happen because that money goes into the general fund.
So why don't we let Mayor Greenberg and his folks have an opportunity to work on some of the initiatives that they have. I know they have been working to recruit more EMTs and first responders and 911 operators. Before we upend this whole entire system, I think we ought to give him the opportunity to get it right again before we just pull the rug out from under his feet.
Corey.
Could you clarify if we're charging for fire runs when they cross borders?
No, there's no cross charge for that. And in fact, I'd asked Dr. Combs information about what was the cost, whether or not they could take the city's fire expenses and figure out what the amount of that would be for services outside the USD. That information was not provided. I'm not sure it was available, wasn't provided. Now, this may be one of those areas where, back to a question that Senator Neal has raised about what's the adequacy of the data on which we're making particular calculations based on financial information that we may or may not have. The information about the deficit, I think, is clear. We've seen that. I think the question here is whether or not there are any kind of offsets to that. You've indicated that the water dividend is not a proper offset. I can't disagree with that as you've explained it. I think the question of the fire services outside the USD is one that requires further examination. Unless you have some information which says that there's simply no way that would be relevant to this discussion, I think we're obligated to take a look.
Well, we can take a look, but I'm going to call for a vote. And the mayor can continue the conversations. This is not making it effective immediately. This is making a recommendation to the General Assembly. The communications will continue. But bottom line is this. The people who don't live in USD don't get the services. They shouldn't pay for them. Mr. Corey.
I was just going to ask, could someone point out where that $14 million so-called deficit was in the data that was reported to us? Does anyone know specifically where that came from?
Paul's on the line. I don't know if he can chime in. But
and I don't think that came from Dr. Coombs. I think the administration.
He got it from the administration.
Correct. The administration puts together an annual report. And as a matter of fact, we talked about this in Budget Committee the other day, because I talked about this next year, they're estimating it at 27 million, which is a general fund transfer that's going to go to the USD to make the USD whole. That's an estimate, to be clear, and the CFO was clear about that. But last year's actual was 14 million. Prior years, it fluctuated in the $7 to $10 million range, usually averaging around $8 million. But that is a calculation done by the CFO, the administration. It is not something that Dr. Coombs created.
Dr. Coombs, do you want to answer the question?
What Tony just said is exactly accurate. We got the actual data from OMB. So those are actually their numbers.
And Dr. Coombs, does that number account for where the revenue came from in the actual general fund? Because that revenue comes from all over the place. It's not just suburban areas or unincorporated areas. So technically, people within the urban services district would be also contributing to that as well.
They would be contributing, I think our last estimate was maybe 20% of the tax money going to the metro government came from the urban service district. So yes, that's true.
So the 14 million would almost be sliced in half.
No, I said 20%.
Okay. So whatever the percentage is, we would take that from that 14 million, correct?
That's true.
No, you wouldn't. And the reason you wouldn't is because that money is for general appropriations. It's for police, it's for roads, it's for libraries, it's for parks. It is not for USD services. So if inside the USD gets to include their general fund tax dollars, that's not appropriate. That's for countywide services. So those don't get counted. The only thing that gets counted is the extra tax that is added on to USD residents for the purpose of USD services. Anything else, I know they want to claim everything, but it's not appropriate. The only thing that's appropriate is what USD residents pay for the purpose of USD services. That's it.
And just to that point,
Otherwise, they're not paying for police at all.
just to that point, did we quantify how everyone benefits? We heard the testimony from Jeff O'Brien. Did we quantify those benefits that are community-wide experiences? Did anybody quantify that whatsoever? No, okay, thank you.
I'll add one thing to that discussion. When I went back to OMB to verify that this was an annual general fund subsidy, they responded that this goes back to pre-merger times when the county government made an annual compact payment to the city of Louisville. I can't remember the amount, but it was in many millions of dollars every year. I remember that from the Revenue Commission reports. Back in the 90s and before merger, there was definitely an annual transfer from the county to the city. And so that was the sort of the justification for a continuing subsidy.
Dr. Coombs, what was the basis of those transfers, those pre-merger transfers?
I can't recall, sorry.
Well, were they not for services rendered to the county residents?
No.
I'm sorry, Earl, I can't remember the.
You're saying that there were that there were no services or benefits accruing to the county residents on account of the city's existence?
I can't remember the justification.
No, I mean, unless you're going to make some argue for indirect, as in like, which I don't argue. And that's actually, to be super clear, that history is accurate. I would not advocate for complete elimination of that process to some degree, but it must be controlled and limited so it doesn't get out of control, is I think what the conversation is really focusing on. At that time, there was no, again, to some degree, other than things like EMS, which have to cross lines because it's county specific, there were really no services that crossed the line. I mean, there was a separate police department. There was a separate everything, right?
But we all recognize that there were separate services. So if the issue that you're raising, Mr. Piergiardini, is that there were various lines in budgets that specifically provided for services to A or to B, we all recognize that. The question I asked, though, is whether or not there were benefits, whether the transfer acknowledged that there in fact were services across the line, if you will, and then whether or not there was any acknowledgement of the fact that there were benefits to the entire community based upon the existence of the city.
With all due respect to you, sir, and to Councilman Arthur, who I hate debating with because he's one of the best debaters on council, is you're asking me to prove a negative.
No, I'm not. I'm asking
What has not been proven.
the information, that's fine.
No, but I can't prove what nobody else has proven first existed. So first somebody must prove that the city at that time was providing a benefit to the county that justified the payment. I have yet to hear, including from people that were part of that whole discussion. I mean, Dr. Coombs did work at that time related to it. Steve Hagg, who's on our caucus, anybody that lived here was here during the time. The people that I know that were involved in the merger discussions, nobody has ever said that there was a reason other than what the old city of Louisville, at that time it wasn't the Urban Services District, it was just the city of Louisville, was just fiscally unsustainable. And it needed assistance from the county and its tax basis to survive, which again I don't see a huge problem with it as long as there are parameters around that, because there is a symbiotic relationship. And look, I live in a suburban area of this city. partially because I get to live in a suburban area and partially because I have access to the city, right? So I don't want it to fail. And I think but that was what the agreement was. There was no accounting for or documentation of a service that was rendered. And just to bring it back to EMS real quick, just so I can wrap up my comments and open up the floor. As far as giving the administration time, and I do highly respect the Greenberg administration and the changes they are making, unless what we are going to argue is that in some very rapid period of time, which all history tells us will not happen, that they will be able to quickly staff up and then create Louisville EMS depots all over the county to correct the retrenchment. I mean, there used to be Louisville EMS depots with trucks all over. Yeah, and that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we've seen what has happened. And what has happened is that has all been shut down and brought into the USD. So unless that is going to be reversed, we have to acknowledge reality because when Middletown Anchorage Fire Department instituted their EMS tax, I was told, and they were 100% right, this is a double tax. Those residents were 100% right. They were paying the tax to the city.
We realize that. We've gone through that endlessly. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think the facts are very clear on that. There's no question but that there are city services which should be provided by the occupational tax and all the taxes that everybody in the county pays, and that are not being rendered to people.
But then I don't understand what is controversial about acknowledging that and then saying that this group should pay for what they are primarily using. This group pays for what they're primarily using for the EMS.
I'm not arguing for the point. I'm simply arguing for that to the extent that that is what we're talking about, that let's not limit that discussion to EMS, even though that's the occasion for the discussion. There are other things that need to be considered as well. Now, I agreed with you that there's no accounting system that said that part of the transfer payments was based upon some notions that somebody was keeping a spreadsheet where the dollars were flowing. I get that. I raised the question over whether it was broader than that. So I would ask, for example, do residents of the county benefit from the fact that the USD is well lit? And particularly they benefit from the fact that the downtown is well lit. Do they benefit from the fact that garbage is collected in the USD? I mean, does the community benefit from things that are paid for?
Yes, there's no doubt about it.
So therefore,
But
Wait a minute, but then the city benefits it because the suburban trash is picked up.
That's right.
When we go into the city, when I come into the city and buy something or pay for something, I'm paying for that. I'm utilizing buildings that are paying property tax to the USD and they're paying that augmented rate. Use the reverse argument. Does the USD benefit that my trash is picked up? Do they pay 1 cent of it? Absolutely not.
yes, but the only point I make to that, Tony, is that we know that at least 40% or more of the income of people who live outside the USD is made in the USD. Right? 71,000 wage earners in the county outside the USD work inside the USD. Now, those people are benefiting from expenses paid for inside the USD by the USD residents. This is not, I'm not suggesting.
That's cherry picking the data, Earl.
No, it isn't.
It is. 50% of the people who live inside the USD work outside the USD. You didn't mention that.
Excuse me, I can't.
Say it's 41,000 inside work outside and 76,000 outside work in. Okay.
There are way more people that work outside the USD than work inside the USD. 50% of the residents of USD who work outside the USD.
Yes.
That's right. Those stats weren't included in your comments a minute ago.
I was going to get there actually.
Okay.
Because the point is that it's a question of where's the revenue, right? Your claim is that it's the revenue, the 80% of the revenue that is subsidizing the USD.
Nope.
I'm sorry, that since 80% of the revenue is earned outside, that's the basis for the unfairness.
That's not the basis for the unfairness. I think you misread our argument. Our argument is simply this. If you live outside the USD, you do not get USD fire. You ought not pay for it. You do not get light. You do not get garbage. You ought not pay for it. Same is if you live inside the USD, you shouldn't pay for Middletown's lights. You benefit from them. When you go to the mall, you get St. Matthew's lights and so forth, but you don't pay from them. Similar both ways. And what we're suggesting is that we will continue to subsidize that up to 10%, for 7 more years. So yeah, we benefit, they benefit, both sides benefit. We want the city to thrive, but we don't want people who don't receive services to pay for them and actually pay double.
Yeah, that's a problem that needs to be addressed for sure.
And this amendment.
But it's the idea of the we pay for and they get and not, that is the kind of mindset, unfortunately, and arguments that are going to continue to keep this community separated and at each other's.
Earl, that's easy to say for somebody who's,
It is easy to say.
it is easy.
It's an easy fact.
It's easy to say for somebody who gets the benefit. Don't talk about me getting the benefit that I'm not paying for.
Let's talk about how to do that.
Here's what I know.
Let's talk about.
Before Anchorage Middletown provided EMS services, we had people who were dying that they weren't getting the service. So we had to create it because we have people. I know two of them who would have died but for Anchorage Middletown existing, because Louisville EMS is not doing their job in providing the service countywide. I don't think anybody can refute that. So why should they have to pay for a service that they're not getting? And that's what this amendment does. I want to continue the debate, but I'm going to call for a vote on it.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to dispute that. I think it's inaccurate to say they're not doing their job. They are overworked and they're addressing a need that is primarily within the urban services district. As we talk about the needs and paying for services, I think there's a sense of confusion between public services and private services. I'm looking at a dashboard from the Office of Resilience and Community Services. Most of what they do is provide for people that are in need. And I don't hear anyone arguing about the fact that your tax dollars aren't being used for these services to come to you. We're talking about things that are supposed to be public services. It is based on need. I'm very fearful of us getting into this that's mine conversation. I think the last committee, we talked about the box. The box goes where the need is. And I'm very concerned with us talking about these services as if they only belong to specific communities when we're supposed to be addressing the fact that we are a merged city and county, and we should be addressing and providing the services where the need is. If you want to have a private EMS, it sounds like some folks have the money to do that. But I want to be very careful. We're talking about tax dollars that should be for public services, not for a specific jurisdiction or geography.
Fully agree. Senator Nemes.
Yes, we've argued this before, but so I want to try to make as concise as I see it on what we're actually going to vote on. Is Metro EMS is going to be contracted back to the USD services, not the whole metro area, which they do now. Actually, I think they should like this. That'd be less for them to do, to be able to handle with what they have to with their employment and stuff. Suburban EMS will handle their own area only, except for the closest box. All of the EMS that goes outside of their districts, prescribed districts, because of they're the closest box, will get paid by the other district. Non-suburban EMS districts are USD. The one that don't have a they don't have a suburban EMS are using USD now and supplemented by the non-metro services. So they're going to take care of this because they're not going to have services per se because they don't have their own EMS, and they're going to be excluded from the Louisville Metro EMS because they're going to consolidate into the urban service districts. So we're offsetting that by saying they can now charge a tax to take care of that by either local agreement with the surrounding EMS services or starting their own. My concern is we need to give them time as we're giving the USD new EMS districts to take care of it. We need time to let them take care of that. Now, I know Shively can do it real quick, but Fairdale needs time to be able to pay the other people. They don't have access to the money to pay them now.
And Senator, I hear you, and I think that can be covered by the third agreement where they have come up with interlocal. If they make a recommendation that they have, the Fairdale have that option for the extension of time, that could come into that, and we'll make that part of the statute.
Thank you. I move that we vote on this.
Can I just understand again that the the notion of reimbursement, is that limited to runs? Or is it limited to costs?
I think it'll be what they come up with. I think that the head of Louisville Fire and EMS with the Chapter 75 chiefs can come up with a recommendation, and I assume it should include all the above.
So are you saying that the legislature is waiting for recommendation from those chiefs or what? I'm not,
Well, what I'm saying is the third recommendation here from this commission, if it passes, would be that those people, the head of the Louisville Metro Fire and EMS separate, and then the head of all Chapter 75s come together, make a recommendation on how they're going to make those payments back and forth when someone makes a run in another district, in another jurisdiction.
well, you're limiting it to runs is my question.
No, whatever they would make the recommendation.
Okay, we're ready for a vote.
Can I ask one question real quick? Sorry to hop in. Just on the end date of 2030, will MetroSafe still be managing and deploying everything for countywide? And if it's yes, if in fact the subsidies stop, how will they be reimbursed for their overhead and their services? That's just it. If it goes to zero, that would be a concern of mine.
God, I think that could be addressed by the third recommendation that they come together with interlocal payments. I think that addresses that. To Tony's, I think Tony was going toward asking for the July 1st, 2030 date to be removed, but I don't think that was a recommendation. But I think your specific request would be covered by when the chiefs and the head of the Louisville Metro EMS and Louisville Metro Fire get together, they can incorporate payment for those services.
That was the gravamen of my question, by the way. Are you ready for a vote?
No, I have a question to follow up with that question. So you're saying this particular item that we're dealing with Louisville Metro EMS also incorporates MetroSafe and emergency management, that as well as dispatching, that all is inclusive when you're talking about Louisville Metro EMS, or is that a totally separate issue? Because I thought we were just discussing Louisville Metro EMS alone.
So Sean, I think what I'm saying is you may have to, and you should, pay for those services that Louisville Metro would be providing. And so that would be part of the interlocal agreement that you strike with the city. Is that your understanding?
It's mine.
That was not my understanding from the actual what I read in the proposal initially. It was just addressing Louisville Metro EMS. Did not discuss MetroSafe as well as the 911 service.
Well, we would have to pay for that in some way. That could be part of right. So how would we otherwise make sure that they get paid for those services that they provide to our Chapter 75s?
Julie,
that's a very good question.
That it be done for free.
Is that part of the general fund that's paying for those services for MetroSafe operations, as well as Louisville Metro EMS? If that's the case, if it comes out of the general fund, could that be stricken separate to say the general fund will continue to pay for Louisville Metro emergency management and MetroSafe services, not the USD? Because everyone gets the MetroSafe services, not just the USD area, but the suburban departments get just as much work and much value out of that service as any one other agency does.
I think that goes to the question that we've been discussing earlier about exactly what is the quality of information that we've got in making some of these decisions.
Let me add here, Earl. There's no confusion there. The MetroSafe 911 center, emergency management, et cetera, that's budgeted separately from Metro EMS. So the chief is correct. The MetroSafe operations are funded by general funds, and it would continue to be so under the proposal you're considering. What you're considering here is.
And does that, Dr. Kuhn, does that include the personnel?
Yes. It's
all budgeted separately from the general fund?
These are different line items in the budget. Emergency management, MetroSafe operations. You're talking here about a piece of that, which is EMS.
Call the question, I think.
I'm not sure what point you're making. I think, I hear what you're saying, but what are you saying? That the concern about that being, that any part of those expenses being USD only is wrong, that there's no basis for that concern?
No, exactly. So
Now,
the
are you
general
saying,
fund-
excuse me, are you saying that there's no basis for that concern? That's a yes or a no?
there's no basis for the worry about the MetroSafe operations being funded by general fund. That's the way it's been forever.
And it's probably part of I would assume it's part of the contract, going back what Tony said some time ago, that part of the money that was paid out in the county to the city in order to help pay for that. Because they were paying, they need to have a 911 service. I mean, I really don't think MetroSafe has, I think it should be separate. And the people out in the county, are paying for that service through their property tax, through other taxes and so on. They're paying for it.
This will speak for themselves, Jim. We're not going to solve this one now. The vote is, the time for the vote is,
Wait,
up.
wait.
The facts are going to take care of it. If it's either included or it isn't. Dr. Coombs says it is, and I understand.
Does that address your concern?
We realize.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. It doesn't answer. It doesn't assure me that taking basically Louisville Metro EMS and putting in the USD services, if we are including Metro Safe services and then having to fill out a different interlocal agreement in order for my department, as well as all the other Chapter 75 fire districts, to be dispatched on fire and EMS with an interlocal agreement and pay for those services, that would literally cripple financially those departments.
And Chief, we're not including that.
We're not including that.
What do you mean
Okay.
you're not included? What do you mean you're not included?
It's covered by the general fund, not by the USD fund.
May I? Before we take a vote? This is a good example of what I've been talking about from the beginning. But can we hear from Mary Ann Butler? Didn't this start with her recommendation, or am I off base here? And it seems like it's ended up somewhere else.
It started with me.
Mr. Neems and Mr. Fleming.
It's Nemus's, which one is that then? I'm looking at the wrong one.
It's the bottom, it's not on that list.
Supplement.
It's a supplement. It was initially produced, but it wasn't.
Okay. So I just wanted to hear from her, because I wanted to get some guidance from her if she had a comment on this, if that's okay and if she's willing.
I'm willing. I think I go back to what Councilman Jacoy Arthur said a while ago. This is a public service. There are 17,000 more runs in the USD than all the suburban fire districts combined. That's a lot. And it's a countywide need, and we need to work together to make sure that it succeeds. We need to let Mayor Greenberg and his people work to make sure it succeeds. He's already working on putting money in the budget to have nurses so they can triage people to determine whether or not an ambulance actually needs to go. They want to do a huge PR. When is the appropriate time to call 911? They also need to have other ways to get people to the hospital that call 911 but don't need it. So there's just so much. So this continues to move. We need to let it evolve and see where it goes, rather than just putting it in the box right now and saying, nope, we got to do this. Don't pull the rug out of him. Give him the opportunity to do this and see where he can go.
Okay. I think that's.
You want to take?
I just wanted to say, I think that everyone here would prioritize life over dollars. And I just want to point out, last week we heard from Jody Myman, and he talked a lot about out-of-service hours from Metro compared to the suburban EMS providers. So if we are going to turn these into quasi-private entities, I think it's important that we address that out-of-service time because the differences are very staggering and very concerning. That's all.
Say that I hear a lot of people that don't seem in support of this talking about countywide services. There are some new people on here. There's some people that have been around a long time, and I didn't hear them complaining when Louisville EMS was closing down shops and trucks all over this county for people that were paying for it. So, where was that concern for countywide services when these were being shut down countywide? Thank you.
And I want to finish my comment if I may. You see, because that gets in this we, they thing again, instead of getting to a solution, and you have an administration that's focused on this issue, and we're not going to give them time to work through this. We're just going to superimpose. Let's give them the concern. And then the information that's coming, I'm not sure the quality of the information or the, what I'm hearing here, well, obvious reasons, but I just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that we vote. I would note that this is not about who the mayor is. This is a structural issue that needs to be addressed. So I ask for the vote.
I think we should proceed with the vote, and let's just do that. Would you call the roll, please?
Jason Nemeth,
Yes.
Earl Jones.
No.
Gerald Neal. Julie Rocky Adams. Mike Nemeth.
Aye.
Ken Fleming. Pamela Stevenson. Anthony Piagentini.
Yes. Yes.
Ja'Cory Arthur.
No.
Cindy Fowler.
She's not here, but she said she didn't want to vote.
Okay. Mary Ann Butler.
No.
Shelby E. Williams Somerville. I'm so sorry.
You're fine. Present, we have not had time to vet this through our Public Policy Council.
Scott Schoenberger.
Yes.
Bonnie Jeong.
Yes.
Sean Drosback.
I want to clarify my vote. I just want to say this is a life safety issue. And since this does get the talks continuing amongst the actual stakeholders, including this Chapter 75 fire districts that I represent and Louisville Metro EMS, that knows the importance of that service to our community, I am voting a yes.
Mr. Chair, did you want to wait for Councilwoman?
Yes.
Want to take a 5-minute? May not be able to go much longer. I don't know. You want to
Outside the.
let's take you want to take a couple-minute break?
Sure, let's do that.
Just in the middle, we're just going to hold the vote. Okay.
I don't ever like holding votes. I don't hold votes. Clinch it.
Cindy Fowler. The vote is 8 yes votes, 5 no votes, 2 present votes. Can I clarify that you are not abstaining, you are voting present, correct? Okay, thank you. There you go.
We take a few-minute break. What? You don't want to? Oh.
Mr. President, would y'all entertain my motion to carry this over on another day at another time?
Second.
I think so.
Can we,
No. That's
Now,
not what he
I
said.
think,
can we move it up until 1:30 instead of 3 on Friday? Is that possible? Does that work
Yeah.
with everybody?
And just to be clear, We adopted that whole hog, so we don't have to come back and address that next week.
I'm done at 2:50. So right before we come here.
So I do think we have to resolve the question of what is the schedule going forward. So far, we're only scheduled for the 8th. I think we'll need more time than that. If we can't meet at 1 o'clock, Mr. Arthur, is there a time, is there an earlier time? 2 o'clock?
So it gets out at 2:50.
That's when I
I gotta-
teach during the day.
Yeah, can we get some time in between?
Before the 8th?
Residuals here.
Is it taboo to work on Labor Day?
I work on
think that
Labor Day.
Fine with me, but I think you got somebody on your side you better check with.
Well, I was also gonna have Metro Council has a fall break, so we don't have meetings in here
Okay.
this next week. So we could take advantage of a Thursday. Sorry, I know we got fall break. I don't mean to volunteer.
I never got a fall break.
What about-
Central
Save us
Council.
being here too long today because
What about the 6th, Wednesday, the 6th? That gives us a work day to get things done, and then we've been on the 6th and gives Earl and me a work day to get things done for the 8th.
what time would that be on the 6th?
I'm wide open, Joe. The 6th,
3:30.
Wednesday, the 6th?
I think you said 3:30. And do, you know,
We
can-
do
can you
1
not-
o'clock.
Can you not do 3 o'clock, Gerald? Why do you have to do so late?
I'm sorry?
You can't go before that?
Before 3:30, man?
Yeah.
Uh,
Can you do 3?
Today I got a speaking engagement. I got a lot of stuff on.
Okay, can't do it that day. Is doing it is at 3?
Wait, I'm sorry, did you say the 6th?
Yes, sir.
I could
Can't do it.
that.
So that's out.
You do 3? No.
The 6th is out
Oh,
for Julie. What about the 7th?
As long as you're done before 7 o'clock. I have a council meeting.
7th at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock is good.
I can do that.
I teach at 1, but at 1:50, I'm ready.
7th at 2 o'clock. Going once,
2 o'clock.
going twice. 7th at 2 o'clock.
That mean we can go home now?
No, we haven't gone through them all, but we decided that we're going to cut and add another meeting and try to finish them up.
Thursday.
And then we're also going to meet on the 8th. Make sure everybody keeps on their calendar. And that's at 3 o'clock.
Motion to adjourn.
Wait, we got to vote.
No,
We
no,
gotta-
no. Lock, stock, and barrel. Done.
All right, we're done.
So ordered.
I think we're going to go, probably count on going to 6.
PM,
Yes.
2 to 6.
That's too depressing.
I can go 2 to 5.
It's not my problem. You don't have to eat my cheap.
Wait a minute. Veggie, not just cheese. Come on now. Your vegetables, if you're not gonna- You're not gonna eat meat, you gotta eat vegetables. Don't make me.
Joe, do you have a preference?
I'm omnivorous.
Okay, me too.